Let's transition and get to the reason why we're really here and talk about Shazam Fury of the Gods, which is the latest installment from DC. It's technically the 12th installment from the DC Extended Universe, which, as we have been talking about, is currently in a state of transition. The DCEU will effectively rest after this year. It will no longer exist because of the plans that both James Gunn and Peter Safran have laid out. But this is a sequel, Shazam Fury of the Gods. It's following up the Shazam pick that came out in 2019. And I want to go back to that place for a quick second before we really dive into Fury of the Gods and think about Shazam when it was initially released. Again, it was right sort of in the middle of the Snyderverse era. We hadn't gotten the official Snyder cut on HBO Max like we did a couple of years ago. And so things were sort of in a place where a lot of DC films that were coming out were sort of one-offs. They weren't really leading to anything, but you could tell that they were starting to try to shift gears to at least introduce some new characters, some new styles, and some new tones, and do something a little bit different. Because I think at that time, we were mostly getting really serious, really dark and gritty DC superhero films. Man of Steel, Wonder Woman even was a little bit dark. Batman v Superman was a very dark and gritty film. Shazam comes along and just completely changes the tone and style of DC, at least for that film. What do you think made that first movie so special? Why was it something that you were so drawn to when it was initially released in 2019?
Man, because I think one thing that was happening is we had already been, I think, so comfortable with the other characters, at least on screen in DC at the time. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman are people, we had been accustomed to and got comfortable with in the beginning. And shoot, even Aquaman, to a degree, people know Aquaman's name. Not a lot of people know Shazam's name. Not a lot of people knew who Shazam was at that time. And I think, to me, beyond Suicide Squad, this was one of the earlier times for DC to take a chance on a character a lot of people didn't know about. And I was wondering what that looked like, right? We had seen it, the MCU introduce characters that a lot of people don't know, Guardians of the Galaxy, hint, wink. But here, Shazam is just kind of the DC version to me. As a lot of people were like, who the heck is Shazam? And I think people knew rumblings of what Black Adam is and who that was, but who was Black Adam even, at the same time while Shazam was coming about. And so I remember just being excited for that. Them going into Shazam being like, okay, we got a new character that a lot of people don't know. How do we introduce them? How do we tell the story of Billy Batson in a way that I think people can understand and relate to? And I think that's what makes the movie so special, is the relatability of Shazam. The story and the heart of Billy Batson is the thing that resonated not only with me, but I think with people across the board. I think that there's a moment in the first one where there's just so much baggage that kid has, that Billy Batson has, and he has to rectify that. But I think it's different than a lot of the DC stories that we know in that way, right? It's different than Wonder Woman growing up on Themyscira and just being a goddess. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh no, this kid was absolutely an orphan. He absolutely has gone from home to home. And I think that's something that's different for DC. DC doesn't always play that role completely. DC doesn't always, go that direction a lot. So I think that is one of the most important things when coming into Shazam and when making the movie of Shazam, that people go, I like this. And not only that, but to have a family aspect and dynamic to go with it.
Yeah, that time was just so interesting for DC because I think the faith that the audience initially had with the brand and with the films that they were rolling out, it was just starting to diminish because there just weren't that many wins. There was a lot of behind the scenes controversy happening, probably stuff that most people weren't privy to, but I think a lot of that came to the forefront and came out publicly, and it just turned a lot of people off to DC. And so here comes a film in Shazam that just switches up all the tone, all the style that we had mostly associated with those films up until that point, and just gave us something fresh and interesting. And I believe, we were also in the midst of the lead up and the conclusion of the Infinity Saga. That Shazam film came out a couple of months before the end of the MCU as we knew it at that particular time with Avengers Endgame. So it was nice to have a very small scale, very low stakes and lighthearted story in the midst of these universal ramifications that we were experiencing with other movies, and just really the I think almost the overexposure of many superhero films just becoming these huge, mega gigantic blockbusters. Shazam was just that oh, this is like a very street level, very earnest story that's about some regular people that all of a sudden end up in this fantastical situation, and it does become a character that you can relate to. And not only that, it was something of a film that changed the dynamic in terms of what our hero wanted to be in the film, because I think we were so used to seeing a lot of the heroes and many other storytelling, methods, whether it was TV, movies, video games, whatever. They became the reluctant hero. That became a regular trope in many superhero stories, as it was in the comics, and it started to translate into live action. Here in Shazam, you have a film where the kid wants to be a superhero. He's super excited about that. He's very enthusiastic and
That's
ready
true.
to try out his powers and figure out what his capabilities are. And that just all felt really exciting at that particular time. And so it went on to become, I would say, a success. It might have been a modest success. The movie was made for about $90 million, but it grossed $366 million worldwide. Didn't necessarily light the world on fire, but that is a successful film for something that was already out of the gate, relatively
Hmm.
cheaper than many of the other big budget superhero fare that we were getting at the time. Not only that, audiences and critics loved it. It had a 90% Rotten Tomato score, very high critical reaction as well. So most people were very enamored by that film, so much so that DC and Warner Brothers decided to greenlight a sequel. We officially got the title reveal of Fury of the Gods at the first DC fandom event back in August of 2020. And then we started to get a little bit more information. We got some behind the scenes footage and conceptual art at the following DC fandom in 2021. This movie also went through a ton of release date shifts. It was moving all around, all over the place for the release calendar
Hmm.
due to COVID, due to just production pipeline issues with VFX studios, shifting around the calendar, stuff with the Flash, I'm sure. So it had quite a few different release dates until it finally landed on this past weekend. But in the midst of all of that, in the midst of all these changes and transitions, just a couple of months ago, we found out that the DCEU, as we knew it, was going to come to an end because David Zaslav, who is now leading Warner Brothers Discovery, has appointed new leadership at DC Studios, and he picked James Gunn and Peter Safran to lead DC Studios into the future. They're co-CEOs. We've talked a lot about their plans on this podcast. We ran down all of their announcements. And in doing so, there's been some confusion, some questions about, well, what does this mean for characters that we've already been introduced to? What
Hmm.
does this mean for the introduction of new characters? We have some solid answers on a few people. We know Henry Cavill's not coming back. We know Dwayne Johnson's Black Adam isn't going to have an immediate future in the brand new DCU. Wonder Woman 3, directed by Patty Jenkins, was canceled effectively. But there's a couple of other characters we're not sure about. We don't know about the status of Shazam and Zachary Levi and if he's going to return. We don't know about Jason Momoa and Aquaman, another movie that's going to be coming out later this year. There's just a lot of questions that we don't
Yeah.
really have insight into as of yet. What do you think about this movie sort of being the beginning of the end for this new DC EU that's going to be coming in the next few years or so? Because we still have three other movies coming out this year. We have The Flash, which we've already talked about, Blue Beetle, which who knows what that movie even is at this point, and of course
Hmm.
Aquaman. It feels like an awkward year. It feels like an awkward state of transition, but it's almost unavoidable, I think. What do you
Yeah.
think about this movie landing in this particular time spot, and also just like what it could potentially mean as we move into the future and where the character may land, if anywhere, in the new DCU?
Man, so many like good questions that it's hard, I think, to have an answer to or put, my finger on, because Shazam is just a unfortunate place is in an unfortunate place right now in terms of everything going on. Not only is it the end of this transition period into the new James Gunn and Peter Safran universe, it's here in the month of March where everything is cracking right now at the movie theater. It's just a lot. There's superhero fatigue. There's money are tight for a lot of people right now too. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's so many things I think going down that makes the Shazam movie feel, I don't know, man, just like a weird stepchild. You know what I mean? Just like, why does it have to be now at this time that this movie is happening? And again, I think it's just unfortunate circumstance. I don't think there's anything they could have really done about it. I do kind of think a little bit how we were supposed to see Shazam in December, which was also a crazy month though, to be fair. You know what I'm saying? And now it's like, dang, when could they have released this thing to make everybody feel better about it? But yeah, it's so weird, man. I think what's going to happen is we'll look back at this film and go, okay, it clearly didn't come at a time or a place where I think people could actually pay attention to it. I'm actually hoping this is one of those films that like people see on streaming and go, oh, okay. Oh, I wouldn't have mind seeing that in theaters. You know what I'm saying? So we'll see what that looks like, man. But yeah, out of everything, it's just unfortunate circumstance. And I think Shazam as a character it's also one of those things where I think if not Peter Safran, but I guess both of them and James Gunn feel like they have a need for this character, which I think is another big topic on top of this is what the hell is going on with the characters in the DCEU
Absolutely.
that they still have yet to answer. Then I don't know, man. There's a lot of questions we have too going into the spoilers of the movie, I think, and where this is going. But man, I think that's one of the big things right now is there's still a couple questions that need to be answered. Give us a DC fandom, give us another James Gunn tells the people what it is, something. But there's definitely another conversation I think to be had.
Yeah, we will revisit this for sure later in the pod. But speaking of unfortunate, we now have some solidified numbers in terms of the performance of this movie. The film opened to 4,000 screens. It did land at #1 at the box office, but it underperformed. There's no way around it. It pulled in $30.5 million domestically. The initial projections were about 35 to 40 million, which were already pretty low, but the fact that it came in even under that is certainly underwhelming. The movie reportedly cost somewhere between $110 million to $125 million to make. It costs another $100 million to promote and market the movie. You can't look at this as anything else but a substantial drop from the first one because that first movie opened to 53.5 million. So we're talking about nearly $25 million less that this movie opened to. Shazam 1 ended up ending its box office run with $140 million domestically, $366 million globally. It seems kind of unlikely that this movie will reach those heights. This is now considered one of the worst starts in terms of DC Cinematic Universe movies under than pandemic era releases. Wonder Woman 1984 opened to 16.7 million. The Suicide Squad, directed by James Gunn, opened to 26 million. But again, those were released in the height of the COVID pandemic, and they also had simultaneous releases on HBO Max. So a fair share of the audience just stayed at home. This movie, in its opening weekend, technically made less money than Morbius. Surprise, which who would have called that? Morbius made $39 million in its opening weekend, which is that's not great. That's not a great optic when you look at just the whole landscape of superhero films. It's not doing that much better in terms of critical and audience reaction. Right now it has about a 53% critical score on Rotten Tomatoes, and I believe it has an 88% audience score as well on Rotten Tomatoes, but it has a B+ cinema score. The first film received an A cinema score, and the first film also had a 90% critical reaction on Rotten Tomatoes. So again, more substantial drops. David F. Sandberg, the director, just actually went to Twitter, I think as early as today, and talked about just the Rotten Tomatoes feedback that the film has gotten. He said this, quote, "On Rotten Tomatoes, I just got my lowest critic score and my highest audience score on the same film. I wasn't expecting a repeat of the first movie critically, but I was still a little surprised because I think it's a good film. Oh well," end quote. So with all of that said, man, what do you attribute to just this low performance? I think you already kind of spoke to some of those things. We are in the midst of a resurgence at the box office in terms of other films. There's a lot of options. There's Scream 6, there's Creed 3. We have many other movies coming out in the next few weeks. Dungeons and Dragons is getting great critical reaction right now. Super Mario Brothers is going to kill at the box office. I have no doubt about it. But I think that there's other factors too, as we have sort of alluded to around the state of the DC universe, around some of the confusion with some of these characters. Maybe people just don't care. What do you attribute to just where things are right now with this box office performance?
Yeah, man. So really all of those things, man. Again, the movie's cracking right now. Shoot, John Wick this week, you know what I'm saying? A lot of people said Shazam. I might go see John Wick. What you mean Shazam? I'm trying to see Keanu Reeves. I also think there is something where I think the appeal of Shazam as a character is a little different, right? When you sell people Shazam back in 2019, the first film comes out, right? When you sell people Shazam in 2019, to me, you also sold the hope of two other characters being involved there, of Superman and Black Adam. And Shazam is clearly in a place right now to where they specifically told us neither one of those characters would be involved in this movie nor the foreseeable future at the moment, right? I think that hurts a lot, right? I can imagine as a casual fan, I'm like, I may not know a ton about Shazam, but I know he did some stuff with Black Adam in Superman. And now you're telling me that's never going to happen. Well, I need to go see this movie for. What's the, you know what I mean? What's the reasoning? Especially when you really like, say you really like Superman, say you really like The Rock. You know what I'm saying? That's already one disappointing thing to hear, I think. And now it's been 4 years since the original. Black Adam wasn't well received, and I think it makes it feel like this movie just came too late. You know what I'm saying? Makes it feel like, dang, well, I mean, we can go watch this movie, but what's going to come out of it? And I think that's always been a thing for some of these superhero films is like, okay, but what is my long-term reward? It shouldn't always be like that, right? A lot of the best superhero films do come out of the right now, like make a good superhero film right now, of course. But again, with all the DC changing, with all of that news, you're like, okay, I know nothing's going to come out of this at all. So, you know what I'm saying? So what's the point? I think that's part of it. Another thing that I've been hearing a lot on the internet is marketing. I've heard so many people be like, Shazam Fury of the Gods doesn't look terrible, but I just seen the ad last week for the first time or something, you know what I mean? I've been hearing a ton of that from a lot of different people. Like, what is this movie?
I have a lot of thoughts about the marketing too, so yeah, I agree.
Marketing. I think that's a big part of it. Even myself, I think not necessarily the frequency for me, but like what is it going to take me to get my butt in the seat to see this film? For me, I mean, we're two black nerds. You know what I'm saying? Like, I love the first Shazam. I love superhero films. I'm going to go see the movie. For a lot of other people, what are you going to do to get their butts in that seat? The Flash trailer got Supergirl, Batman, Flash
two Batman
is doing stuff, two Batman. You know what I'm saying? What is the Shazam trailer doing to make people say, I have to go see that? To me, I love Helen Mirren and Lucy Liu. It's not enough. Give us their motivation, maybe give us something else in the trailer to get people there. And unfortunately, the trailer doesn't do that. I think the Shazam family could be a good draw, but you know what I mean? There needs to be more. And so I think there's just a multitude of reasons for it. And again, some of them are unfortunate circumstance, but I think that marketing piece is a little important as well.
I agree with everything you said. And so I will just add that I simply just think that people don't care. I just don't think people care about this character or this franchise really to a degree which would make them rush out to go see it in the midst of all the options that people have available. Not only the stuff in theaters, but there's great stuff at home now too. You know, The Mandalorian is back. The Last of Us just wrapped up. People are ready for Succession to come back and just other shows. Like there's big hits that you can watch at home. And so what is going to be that element that gets people and gets their butts in the seats? And it just felt like all the way up until the lead up into this film, there was just no buzz around the movie. There was no buzz at all. Like nobody was talking about it. And that doesn't speak to the quality, because I think you and I would agree it's not a bad movie by any means. It could be better. It's not the greatest thing we've ever seen, but it's not bad. It's not a train wreck. But when saying that, that's just still not enough to get people to say, like, I want to spend my hard-earned money to go watch this movie in a theater with other random strangers. It's just not enough these days. To the marketing piece of it, there have been some notable small things that I don't think a lot of people will necessarily pick up on, but I pay attention to this stuff with you know, really big budget releases just because it matters, you know, and this is kind of the industry that I'm also in. Like, I work in social media entertainment, so some things that I don't see stand out to me. Like this movie, and this might seem really ridiculous to say, but I'm going to say it. Like, there's not even a YouTube playlist on the Warner Brothers YouTube that contains all the trailers and TV spots for this movie. When you go on the Warner Brothers YouTube or when you go on their Twitter platform, the banner image is for The Flash, which is 3 months away. It's not for this movie that's currently playing in theaters right now. There's not even a custom Twitter hashtag emoji that we would typically see with a lot of these big films. It almost feels like Warner Brothers just kind of wanted to get this movie out and get it in front of people's faces and just kind of wipe their hands clean of it and be done and just move on. Like, I think that all their attention is focused on The Flash. Like, there's actually something there. The whole release strategy of this movie just kind of felt like oh, well, I guess we got to do it. We'll spend a little bit of money, but maybe we won't spend more money because we see that it's not tracking great. So we're not going to pump more dollars into something that's not going to return us our investment anyway. So why add any more to it? So it just kind of felt like they wanted to be done with it and just get it
Mm-hmm.
out there and keep it moving, which part of me can't necessarily blame them. You have to make some tough decisions as a studio, especially when you
Yeah.
bring in the financial piece of it. But it's also really unfortunate because you want movies to get their just due. You want people to at least be aware of it. And as you said, I just don't even think a lot of people are aware of it. Or if they are aware of it, again, they just don't care. They're like, I'm gonna go see something else. All the males, they're waiting for John Wick. Like they're totally in for that. The horror crowd, they're seeing Scream. Creed is
Yep.
still making tons of money. Families, which this movie is primarily targeted to, they're gonna wait for Super Mario Brothers. Like the family
Yeah.
going demographic, I think has been the most difficult demographic to get back in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
Most notably due to the low performance of a lot of animated movies. I think the Super Mario Brothers movie is gonna kill, and they're just gonna wait for that as opposed to seeing another superhero film that they're probably used to everything that's going to be tossed at them with that type of story. So again, it is unfortunate. Doesn't speak to the quality of the movie, but it does speak to just the state of things and where things
Mm-hmm.
are and how people perceive this stuff. One more question I just want to ask you before we move on to our official review in this conversation about the box office. It's not just Shazam. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is not doing great. Like after that opening weekend, the biggest opening weekend for any Ant-Man movie, that film has practically cratered at the box office. Like it's not
Yeah.
even it's not looking like it's gonna even catch the first Ant-Man movie in terms of overall worldwide
Wow.
box office gross. It's gonna be the lowest of the three. Do you think we have potentially moved past the era where any superhero film could just like come out and easily make all the money in the world? It can anything you slap Marvel or DC onto it. It doesn't matter what type of character it is. It doesn't matter if it's the biggest marquee character or the lowest common denominator. You put anything out, it's gonna just cross maybe $500 million easily. Do you think we're past that era where people need a little bit more? They need event level spectacle to actually get them out into the theaters to see these movies.
Absolutely. We're in a time now where it's all about, people are saying it left and right. Superhero fatigue is a real thing, right? And I think there has to be a place and a space for these movies now for I think a breach of creativity, right? New things need to be on the horizon now, I think, for people to get interested in going to see something. I think one of a decent example to me is Matt Reeves' Batman. You know what I'm saying? Everyone was like, okay, it's Batman, superhero fatigue, all these superhero movies are out, but you see that trailer and you go, okay, wait a second, this thing is different. Like this is a new, different thing. And unfortunately, between the main DCEU and the MCU, we haven't gotten that sense, right? We haven't, to me, gotten that feeling of, okay, yeah, this is different. And to be honest, not until that dang Flash trailer came out. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh shoot, even that feels different, than a lot of things that we've been seeing. And I think that definitely adds to the conversation, definitely adds to the decision that people are making when going to see these films, man. And so now it's like, what are you doing different? How do you, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. How do you make it? Because even in some ways, Guardians is like, okay, we've seen Guardians before, right? Part of it is we know what Guardians is. Part of it is we know James Gunn is going to come out, do it, you know what I'm saying, have a decent film, bare minimum, if not a really good film, and give us that. Now it's the next couple of movies. When the Marvels trailer comes out, when Aquaman trailer comes out, it needs to be something. It needs to grab the people. And I think that's what's missing now. You can't do it's a superhero movie. You're going to go see it. Now it needs to be a superhero film with a hook. Give people a hook. Give people a reason to come to the theater. And that's it, man. That's what needs to be done.
I absolutely agree. It's just not enough anymore. I think gone are the days where you can just put out a superhero film and it's going to be untouchable at the box office. We're just not in that era anymore. And it's even more interesting when you look at 2022. The highest performing movies last year, though they were sequels, they were not superhero movies. Top Gun Maverick, Jurassic World, Avatar: The Way of Water. I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, it would have been unthinkable that a superhero movie was not leading the box office in any given year. Now we're seeing, oh, there's actually space for other sequels, other franchises, other films to come in and lead the box office pipeline because superhero movies, we get so many of them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They're now reaching that stage where, yeah, if there's not a creative difference, if it doesn't feel like it's something that I need to go rush out and see, if it doesn't have that element of just water cooler conversation where it's like must see right now, or creatively it does feel something unique compared to everything else that's come out. I mean, streaming is just, taking a different type of turn post COVID where folks will just wait, simply, flat out. They will just like bypass any theatrical movie going and just wait for streaming because now it's just become that normalized to do so,
Mhm.
because if you're not seeing anything different, well, I don't have to wait. I can just give it, another 4 weeks and it's going to be on HBO Max or it's going to be on Disney Plus anyway. So why go rush out
Yeah.
to see it? So very interesting state of things, but we'll have to see how that all works out. But let's go ahead and transition and finally talk about the movie in depth of why we are here. And let's talk about the 12th entry into the DC Extended Universe, Shazam, Fury of the Gods.
Billy, what are you doing?
I have to do this.
We end this now!
Yeah, we do.
Started from the bottom, now we're here. Started from the bottom, now the whole team here. Started from the bottom, now we're here.
This movie is directed by David F. Sandberg and it's written by Henry Gayden and Chris Morgan, and it's starring Zachary Levi, Asher Angel, Jack Dylan Grazer, Rachel Zegler, Adam Brody, Ross Butler, Megan Good, Lucy Liu, Jimon Hansu, and Helen Mirren. So before we talk about all the nitty gritty details as it relates to Shazam Fury of the Gods, we're of course going to do our regular character breakdowns like we do and talk about all the big moments that occurred throughout this film. We're just going to start with our big picture thoughts and reactions to Shazam Fury of the Gods. So with all the context, all the background information out the way, man, I will pass it over to you. What did you think about Shazam Fury of the Gods?
Shazam Fury of the Gods is a decent time at the theater. It doesn't necessarily do anything new. It doesn't reinvent any wheels. In fact, you've seen a decent amount of this movie before. But what it does add is I think some comedy and heart that a lot of other films do tend to miss, sometimes. I think this movie does fit in the avenue that the first Shazam that a lot of other superhero films I think just don't have. I think again in that heart aspect, in that family aspect, that for me made it enjoyable. Unfortunately, I wish there was more of that. There's a lot of the family that gets undermined in this movie, and I would have loved to see more of them. In fact, that's what I thought I was getting when I bought into this movie. I thought I would see more of Billy Batson's siblings. I really did. And even though we don't get some of that stuff, there's just a decent amount of moments in this movie that I liked or had me laughing, which I appreciated. Again, a lot of other superhero films don't necessarily make you laugh that much, or they don't always make you feel like, oh, you know what I mean? They don't give you that heartfelt family moment like this movie does. And so it's a fine film. Again, I appreciate I think what they were going for, but there's some things that I was just looking forward to that they didn't provide, I think, and that made me that definitely took me aback. It's also a little bit unfortunate that I think the wow factor in some of this is lost because of that formula that they were kind of following in this film. I think I was looking for something different in like a third act in this movie. They kind of gave me something I had seen before, of course, with again very small nuances and changes, that things I haven't. But the overall, theme you had seen before. I was hoping for a little bit more out of our antagonists as well. I really was. I was hoping for. I think they do okay performance-wise. Lucy Liu doesn't work 100% for me here. Something about her performance, the way she yelled, the way I don't know. It felt like she was a villain from like 2005 in this movie. I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. But Helen Mirren, I absolutely enjoyed what she was doing in this film. I actually also really like Helen Mirren's costume. I think that was like low-key a beast, the way how good her costume looked in this film. But man, I really don't have much more to add than that. I think overall it's again a fine film to go see in the theater. Not the greatest movie ever. Also not the worst movie ever. Worse than the first Shazam? Probably. First one had a little bit more heart, had a little bit more we hadn't seen this movie before. I will say there is something in this film that do turn up a little bit, and that's the I think the correlation between Baby Billy and Big Billy, I guess, in Shazam, I think they acted a little bit closer to what they were supposed to act to. In the last movie, there was a couple of times it was a little disconnect between the two actors, but here I was like, okay, y'all did a little bit better this time around. One small criticism: not enough young Billy. There wasn't enough young Billy. This movie, to me, could have worked better if there was just more kids. There was more kids. They are in Shazam form a lot in this movie, and I think have we gotten, I think, more of the kids that sometimes turn into superheroes, I would have been talking about this movie a little bit different and enjoyed some of those family aspects a little bit more than I already did. So yeah, man, it's such a weird movie because it's like, dang, I've seen a lot of this before, but I also still like it, kind of type thing. But also was looking for more out of the film. So yes, I enjoyed it, but again, I needed a little bit more from them.
So generally, on a macro level, I gotta be honest and say I'm pretty disappointed by this movie. That being said, I agree that it's not bad by any means, and there's a lot here that I do like. There's a considerable share of things that I think work particularly well in the sequel. But conversely, when you talk about the first movie, in which we have done, I think another reason that that film worked so well is because it's ultimately about two adolescent boys, Billy and Freddie, who accidentally they get sucked into this fantasy adventure, right? This superhero story. They're trying out powers. It's very earnest. It's very lighthearted. It's really endearing to see them just like feel the excitement of what it would be like to have powers and to just experiment and see what that all looks like. And that clumsy nature of that transition and figuring out, well, how are we going to be heroes? Like, what can you do? How are you going to save other people? And also not letting that get to your head and not letting that power consume you. Those are all really, really interesting and cool ideas when you get that dichotomy between these young boys now having this very adult responsibility. And so that genuine excitement of that element, and also these kids wanting to be superheroes and wanting to try out those powers and wanting to do good, all made that just a really enjoyable and I think ultimately successful adventure from DC. This movie, Shazam Fury of the Gods, mostly sticks to the comic book formula that I think the first movie actually poked fun at. The first movie kind of directly spoke to many of the tropes that we see in superhero films and kind of subverted the expectations of what you would see in any given scenario. This movie just followed a lot of that same blueprint that many films before it have already done. And so I think you get an experience where they traded in the stuff that made the first movie work so well for just like more formulaic comic book movie tropes that we're just so accustomed to seeing. There were moments and times watching Shazam Fury of the Gods where it just felt like they were doing comic book the movie. Like that was what we were watching because it's like, yeah, I've seen that before. And oh, that's happened in this movie. And I can directly reference like this third act battle in many other films that we've seen. And also the character motivations are very similar to other films we've seen, even out of DC at that. And so I just found myself really let down and disappointed by that because I was coming to a film after that first film worked so well for me. I was coming to a film that I was hoping would add some more ingenuity to just the whole comic book landscape that we're just so accustomed to seeing on a month-to-month basis at this point. We go to the movies a lot and we see a lot of comic book films and they often do the same things. And so I just wanted David F. Sandberg and his crew and the cast here to just bring something different. It's not totally void of creativity. There are some interesting moments here. There are some things that work particularly well for the characters and the story here. But I do think that this is a considerable step down from what they achieved in that first movie. That said, still some stuff I enjoy. There's still some good humor and some good heart at certain points and in moments throughout this movie. I think some of the performances are solid. In actuality, Jack Dylan Grazer, who plays Freddie Freeman, it's really his movie. He kind of steals it, and he really steps up. And to your point about Asher Angel, who plays Billy Batson, he's just frankly not in the movie enough. You needed more of him. And so I think Jack Dylan Grazer actually gets more to do here, more to work with, and he's really kind of the thing that stood out the most to me in this film, along with a few other things. And the last thing that I'll mention is in relation to the villains. It's always nice to see these legends, these icons come into these different worlds and universes and just have fun. Helen Mirren is literally an actress legend, and seeing her just play in the sandbox, it's great. And she mostly does good. I actually think that some of the stuff that she had to do, it kind of worked. Lucy Liu, I can't disagree with you on that. I totally agree with your point about her, and we'll talk about her in depth here in a second. But overall, their characters as the villains in this movie just doesn't really work because I didn't totally understand their motivations. I didn't really understand, like, well,
Right.
why do you want this? Why is this
Mhm.
such a pain point for you? Like, what do you need to achieve here that you can't do so in a more peaceful way? I don't know. All that stuff kind of felt weighed down by this Greek mythology and this heavy exposition that really kind of mired the experience of the movie for me at several different points in time. So it's okay. It's a fine movie. It's not something I could say you need to go rush out and see. It's definitely the type of movie where it's like you can wait because ultimately there aren't really many ramifications for what the story will mean for any future DC storytelling or even really the characters involved in this story itself. And so it's just one of those things where it's like the timing is weird. It's just a weird state of thing. It's awkward for this movie to come out when it is coming out. And it doesn't help that the actual experience of watching it didn't elevate it beyond all the weird stuff that's happening in the public with DC as it moves forward into the future. So we'll have to just, think about that and really reflect on that as we continue to talk about this movie. But with all of that out the way, we're going to go ahead and spoil this movie and get into all the nitty gritty details. So if you've not seen Shazam Fury of the Gods, this is your official spoiler warning. Check out the movie whenever you get a chance and then come back and listen to the rest of our conversation. And so with that said, we should start off this conversation, of course, talking about the titular character, Shazam, aka Billy Batson, who's played simultaneously by Zachary Levi and Asher Angel. And I should mention that we're going to have to pair these conversations up with the two actors who play these one characters because this is like a weird, different situation. Like you have a younger actor playing an character that also becomes older. So we're going to do sort of a pairing off situation. Shazam, of course, the titular character. This is his story. This is his movie. Zachary Levi and Asher Angel returning. I think, as you said in your non-spoiler section review, that those two in particular in that first film, I think that they worked really well together. I think that the casting of both of them was a pretty genius move on the part of DC, the people that were in charge. Like Asher Angel did a lot in that first movie, was really somebody that you could connect with and feel for and empathize with. And then Zachary Levi being the older version, of course, with the powers, just being this kind of gullible yet really excitable teenager about having these powers now in, grown man form, was just that interesting dichotomy between two characters that you just never really see. Coming into this movie, we're seeing a little bit of an older iteration of the Billy Batson character. It's taking place about a couple years after that first movie. So Billy Batson is approaching 18. And so the state of his character now is dealing with some of the fallout and ramifications of what we saw in that first movie. We know Billy Batson is an orphan, right? He was left behind by both his father and his mother. He has found a family in the foster home system, which we know to come to be this Shazam family or the Vasquez family that actually live together when they're not being superheroes. But as the leader of this new group, he's sort of dealing with abandonment issues. He's very afraid that he's going to lose his family because he's already gone through that with his mother and his father. And so he's trying to do everything he can to keep them together, to keep them tight knit and close. And he wants them to work so badly as a superhero team. So when we first see him, he's having a quote unquote therapy session. It's not really therapy because he's talking to his pediatrician, probably the only doctor he knows, but you kind of see that change in his character and where he's at in this place in his life at this moment. What did you think about that being sort of the key component to his character arc in this movie? And ultimately, what do you think about what both Asher Angel and Zachary Levi brought to that particular story?
I actually really love that character arc, I think, for Billy Batson, where again he goes his whole life in search for his real family. He comes across this new family, and of course I think when he's finally comfortable in a family that accepts him, that he would attach to that, right? If you haven't had that your whole life and you finally get it, you're gonna hold on to it. So I do really like that character arc for him. I like the idea of everyone is just growing up and getting older and doing their own thing, and he's like, man, y'all have had family for a little bit longer than I have, right? They've been together. He came into the house super fresh and super new than everyone else kind of did. And they were at least together for a while. And Billy is like, again, just the new kid on the block. And I don't know. I can just imagine being in his shoes and being like, man, I haven't had a lot of family. I finally got it. And now it's slowly, fading away from me. Everybody's getting older. Freddie's getting older. Mary still wants to go to college. You know what I'm saying? There's just a ton and a lot going on. And so that's something I held on to, I think, in the film. I wish they hammered it a couple more times before we got to like the end scene with the mom and stuff, when it's like, you know what I'm saying? I wish we had a couple more moments with the family. But man, I like that character arc for him. I wish, again, we had, I think, a little bit more Asher Angel to convey that message too, because of course, a lot throughout the film, he was struggling, I think, with that idea with his family as Zachary Levi, as Shazam, versus Billy Batson. And I wish there was like a family moment or two when they're kids, right? When they're in the young form, to hash some family stuff out, to talk about that a little bit more. Instead, everything was kind of, I think, muddled and loud and within that problem. It's like, yeah, Billy Batson's having this problem, but these villains over here, we got to take care of them. Or here's this big action set piece that happens, and now we can't talk about the family stuff that's going on. I think in the end, they do an okay job, you know what I mean? At least talking about it and bringing it to the end of the film. But I just wish there was a little bit more in there for us to chew on.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, in the opening moments of the film, right before they go on their next superhero mission to rescue the bridge and prevent that catastrophe, he walks out and he says, "Bye, Rosa." You know, he doesn't call her mom, and we see that that emotionally affects her. She wants him to accept that as his family, you know, and to accept her as his mother. And they don't revisit that concept until practically the end, where they have a conversation to bring her back, to say, like, you'll always have a home here, you won't age out. So they just didn't touch on that at any point in the middle of the film. So it just kind of got lost. They just, you know, traded that in for, yeah, we need action set pieces and we need to progress the story of the villains for whatever reason. And so a lot of that family stuff that they could have built upon, it was definitely introduced in the opening moments, and I thought it was really, really interesting stuff. And that, again, is a key differentiating factor that makes this unlike other superhero films that we get. But it just wasn't enough of it. And I also think that Zach Levi, I don't know what was going on here, but, like, again, the character of Billy Batson is approaching 18. I might be misremembering my own experience of being around that age, but it felt like Zach Levi was still playing Billy Batson at several points, like he was 14 and 15, a little too young, a little too petulant, where I'm just like, yo, come on, you're almost 18 now. You wouldn't be acting this immature. And so I actually do kind of hold Zach Levi a little responsible for making some of those choices, because I would think that Billy Batson would be a little bit more mature in several situations, especially considering when you do see Asher Angel in the few moments that you get him in this movie. It just feels like a disconnect. Like, the way that Asher Angel acts as Billy Batson does not feel the same way that Zach Levi acts as Billy Batson as a character. So I thought that there was just like a weird disconnect at several points there. But again, interesting idea introduced there, but ultimately the execution could have been handled a little bit differently. One thing I do like, the fact of what his character had to do here was sort of lead the Shazam family. We saw at the end of the last movie, the Shazam family was a surprise element introduced into that first movie. It was speculated, oh, will we see other members of the Shazam family? And we do get them at the end of that first movie. And so now their presence is pretty much fully formed here. And so we should talk about them as a whole and move through all the characters. So what's interesting about the Shazam family is that because they are kids, they mess up. They do not get things right. They are still trying to work through their powers and their responsibilities. And so they have probably had quite a few scenarios in which they kind of fumble and they don't do the greatest job. And we see that in the opening action set piece on the bridge in Philadelphia, which I do think is a great, great introduction for those characters. It was really fun to see them in that environment, but they also get dubbed the Philadelphia Fiascos because they just suck. The bridge collapses. They do save a bunch of lives. I think it was like 192 people they saved. Yep. So great job. That's really the primary focus, but the collateral damage, it's still absolutely there. What do you think about them as a unit? We'll talk about all the characters specifically, but just about the fact that the Shazam family is now like the superhero team of Philadelphia. Although most people in public are probably looking at them like, we really don't need you because y'all are kind of messing things up more than you have to.
Yeah, it's so interesting, I think, to have this young team that everyone thinks is old, because that's why they're messing up. It's funny because, like, if people knew how old they really were, they'd be like, oh, well, duh, the bridge collapsed. They don't know. They're not thinking, I think, together as a unit. I also think it's interesting that, like, that is the one thing that Billy was also trying to fix actively, was how well they work together. And also another thing that they unfortunately, like, don't do by the end. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's one of those things where it's like, hey guys, we have a problem. We're disconnected right now. And then by the end of it, you don't get that moment where it feels like everyone like really came together as a Shazam family. You know what I'm saying? I think that was a missed opportunity. But I think as a concept, that all works for me, man. That all is, I think that's really cool that these superheroes, the Philly Fiascos, are just tearing up all over the place. Well, yeah, she's 12, he's 14, you know what I'm saying? Of course they over here tearing up. But they're doing what they can do. And so my favorite again aspect of these films have been the family, and I love how you can see everyone's personality slightly in everything. You know, I love how you can see, I don't know, somebody is trying to stitch together the bridge because it's the smart thing to do versus like working with, I don't know, somebody else over here who was just like, oh, kittens, let's get these kittens off the bridge first. Wait a second, did she just leave us?
Yeah,
you know
Faith
what I mean?
is completely distracted by the cutest shit possible.
Faith is, you could tell she's a young girl, man, because it's like, why didn't you just take the whole car to begin with? She literally took the kittens before she took the people. That's like exhibit A of why the bridge collapsed. You know what I'm saying? And I think that makes sense. And I think that's a really cool thing to bring to those characters. Again, I just wish there was a moment where we like see a growth happen by the end of it, where we're like, they saved this thing, the city or whatever. And by the end, they saved it like, I don't know if anonymously is the word, but they were like mostly non-Shazam, right? When they're like going through the city, they lost their powers. And so I wish there was a moment where they are Shazam family and they can kind of give us the opposite of what we seen at the beginning of the film.
Like finally being embraced by the city of Philadelphia. Like,
Exactly.
Oh, well, wait a second. Like maybe they're not the Philadelphia Fiascos. They actually did a tremendous job at making sure the city felt safe. And so there is a lot to talk about with that final action set piece. But I think it was a great way to just like kickstart that energy of the movie with this opening action set piece. It's actually technically the second one because we get introduced to the villains first, but to come here and to see them, you know, sort of trying to rescue all these people off the bridge, as you said, a lot of the character beats really spoke to who they are as the young children, as they're sort of imitating what it's like to be an adult. They're trying to be more than what they really are. And, you know, you even see like Freddy's character, he's all of a sudden just like somewhat letting it go to his head because he's feeling super confident. He calls himself Captain Every Power, and he's dubbed, you know, Billy Captain Every Power Jr. So he thinks he's like really the leader. It's all really good stuff to play off of their relationship with each other, but it was a fun way, I think, to get them back into the fold and get them back into the mix of things. What I also thought was cool, and I just want to quickly ask your thoughts about, was their lair. Like, we don't really see like superhero lairs anymore. It feels like it's like a bygone product of past superhero films. It used to be like super common. Like you had Iron Man would be in his mansion or a Stark Tower. The Batcave is a thing. But I think that we've kind of gotten away from that as like superheroes have become more, I guess, more global. A lot of these films are dealing with multiversal stuff, or they're dealing with really global implications. So they move around a lot. But it's nice to just have like a team come back to a centrally located place that they all know about. It's really the Rock of Eternity, which was introduced in that first movie, but they've turned it into like their own personal man cave, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it's also pretty cool to see because they are kids. It is like a mix between the Rock of Eternity being this really, really important place that holds magic, and you can see the statues of the 7 deadly sins are still there and everything. And then there's
next to a pinball machine right next to it, right?
A pinball machine. They got generators activating lights all over the place. Clearly, Darla has all of her Skittles all over the place. It's a lot going on there, and I love how much I think personality they put into that layer. I thought that was also a pretty good look, man. And of course they would like deface the sins who they just defeated, and of course they would have like all these couches around, and I thought it was dope how they had it set up, man. It made sense. Again, I just wish there was like a maybe an explanation why they felt like they had to be the superheroes in the Rock of Eternity. Like maybe they go back to the lair and they're kids. Like, oh, we're kids in the lair, because it feels more like, to me, that's the downtime. You're back in the lair, right? How often do you see Batman in the Batcave with his Batsuit on? Not that often, to be honest. You know what I'm saying? Unless he has to go put it on, or unless he's obsessed with something and he's like at his computer. But that's what, you know what I'm saying, though? Like, I feel like that they should have used it a little bit more downtime. Still feel like they was always in superhero mode. Yeah,
it was one of those things where it was clearly a device to get the grown actors on screen more. Like, they did not have to be that way. Because I'm thinking, like, if I'm a superhero, when I get back to the crib, I'm in my sweats, bro. Like we're working, but I'm gonna be comfortable. I don't have to sit in this uncomfortable, real tight around my crotch superhero outfit because it's gonna be just mad uncomfortable. Like, let's change. But I think that that's just like one of those weird choices that they had to make to say, like, well, we can't have like DJ Catrona not be in the movie. We have to figure out somewhere to get him into the movie. So let's just make them grown inside the superhero layer. So it's a bit of a weird disconnect, but something that I guess was like a necessary evil, so to say. The balance piece of it is something I do want to quickly revisit. I think that actually, if I'm being honest, I think that the balance between the younger actors and the adult versions of them, it was a tricky thing that they had to juggle with this movie.
That's
right?
true.
You want to get them, you want to get them both like a fair share amount of screen time, and also you're introducing more new characters, like 3 or 4 new characters that have a pretty big presence throughout this movie as well. I kind of feel like that they did a decent job. I agree that more of the kids at certain key points throughout the movie could have worked in the film's favor, especially as we get back to the family story and really helping elevate and develop that dynamic between Billy and his sisters and his brothers. But I think that, they definitely were strapped for time. It was clearly already a long movie. And so they had to make some unnecessary choices, or not some unnecessary choices, but some necessary choices to make some difficult decisions, I guess, all throughout the movie. But, again, one of those things that you have to, sort of take it as it comes. We should talk about Jack Dylan Grazer coming back as Freddie Freeman, but also his adult counterpart, Adam Brody, playing the character. We see a lot more of Jack Dylan Grazer than we do of Adam Brody. Like, Adam Brody as the adult counterpart is actually kind of sacrificed early on, and we don't see that much of him. And so I think Jack Dylan Grazer gets a great opportunity here to once again come to the forefront, be one of the central figures of the story, and also bring back a lot of the heart that we experienced in the first movie, because not only of his close relationship with Billy, but due to the fact that he's now developing this new romance in this film with this new character, Anne, played by Rachel Zegler. What did you think about Jack Dylan Grazer and just everything he brought to the role in this time out?
Man, he really is, I think, the heart and the make of this film, for a better part of it. He doesn't feel like the sidekick in this movie, like you said, we see more of Jack Dylan Grazer than we do Adam Brody. And I think that is not necessarily the case for everyone else, or just in general. His character, the Freddy character in general, just has a ton of screen time. And that was a thing that was easy to latch to. Not only that, but his performance to me was just stellar. I thought he brought everything that he needed to bring to the table in terms of what he was meant to do. Him and Rachel Zegler had a decent amount of chemistry to me. I thought they did a pretty decent job. He's still funny. And he even in some ways elevated some of those scenes where he had to be more fearful, right? Where he has to stare in the face of a dragon. You know what I'm saying? I was like, this dude is kind of killing this, even his moments with DJ Mahausu as the wizard. I was like, oh man, this is funny. This is good stuff. And everybody he touched on screen, it always felt like he was meant to be there. It always felt like he was doing the right thing to me. And so, yeah, he really felt like the star of the film to me, even though we know it's about Asher Angels, Billy Batson, and Zachary Levi. We know it's about them, but it still felt like, man, Jack Dylan Grazer is kind of overshadowing kind of everybody in the movie right now. And part of that is he just had more to do, right? He had to have the romance with Anne. He had to get stuck in, a prison cell with the wizard. He had to, kind of go back to the family or not go back to the family, but it kind of get rescued, quote unquote, by the family and things of that nature. He just had more to do. And because of that, there was, he was on screen a lot. But I think he did a good job overall, man. I really like his character. One thing I think that will always be interesting about his character is the fact that when he comes out of Shazam mode, he does go back to being slightly handicapped. You know what I mean? He does go back to being, accessibility needed in that way. So I think that's always interesting. That always adds something else to his character, because there's that moment where he's trying to steal the apple of life, whatever it's called, and he starts sprinting with his cane. And it's something about that brings like just a heart to the character. You know what I mean? It brings a realness and something that we of course can laugh at, but we're like, oh, he is like not super Shazam. It just adds another layer to his character that I think I appreciate when watching him on screen, man. So I think he did a tremendous job all around.
Yeah, certainly. He's the bridge between the A and the B story. The A story ultimately became about the villains. The B story was more so about the family and Billy Batson's connection to the rest of his siblings and just his overprotective nature. But Freddy was that guy that, sort of bridged those two stories and those two worlds because of the relationship that was developed with Anne and just that whole romantic, sort of pairing that they had between each other. And so I think that he was tremendous in this movie. He was really electric every time he was on screen. Pretty much everybody he worked with in the film, he had just great chemistry with. You already talked about Rachel Zegler. Even the stuff he was playing off of with Jimon Hounsou or Helen Mirren, like he's standing next to very credible actors that have been doing this for quite a long time, and he's holding his own. And I love the fact that this is a guy who, in this movie, because he is like super confident as his older counterpart, he's going off to do like side missions by himself. Like he's that confident where he's like, I'm gonna go like save this car accident and prevent this from happening. He still fucks up like we would expect him to, but he's at least making a go at it, right? So he has his own agency, I think, throughout this story where he isn't completely reliant on the family. He's not just there as like another piece of the puzzle as it relates to them being a team. He's also trying to establish himself as like his own individual and his own character while still contributing to the family mission and ultimately what they're trying to do. The relationship with Anne as a character is a big piece of it. And that happens in the first act where we get Rachel Zegler in this movie. As you said, I think they have a decent amount of chemistry with each other. It felt very natural how they met each other, even though we know it wasn't natural. Like she met him on purpose, really, because by design, they had to get her character as being one of the daughters of Atlas into this family and to figure out who these superpowered beings were on this particular planet, on this in this city at least. And so the way that they meet each other feels really natural, but they develop like this, this nice team romance. And I think that it's one of those things that, again, helped imbue some of that more down to earth, really on the ground sensibilities that made the first film so special, that again helps separate this from other stuff. It's like just kids in high school, right? Just meeting each other, and you get to see a guy who is probably considered a nerd, probably considered somebody that doesn't really socialize with that many people. He also gets bullied ridiculously by those two assholes. Now he actually meets somebody that he can connect with, right? But he's also still trading in the stuff that makes him special in the service of somebody he thinks is cooler than himself, and that's the older counterpart of him. Like he had that moment on the rooftop where he's like, "You want to meet my friend who's a superhero?" Like he thinks that that's the approach to take as opposed to just being himself. What did you think about just the way that they played off of each other all the way up until the reveal where we finally find out she is one of the daughters of Atlas?
Yeah, I think it is one of those things that we have seen before, right? Like love interest sneaks into the other family or to somebody who is a person of interest and tries to get information from them or tries to get to somebody else with them. But there's something about it here again, just between the actor and the actress, between Rachel Zegler and Jack Dylan Grazer, that just makes it feel different. It's something about I don't know, everything I think Freddie brings to the table that is like this cool high school moment that, again, we have kind of strayed away from in some of these, I think, superhero films, right? But outside of Spider-Man, there's not a lot besides like Miss Marvel, which we just had, there's not a lot of high school things going on. And I think that's something that when they did play on it, they played on well, the high school aspect of this thing, man. And I also, again, great character choice for Freddie, somebody who wanted to be a superhero, I think their entire life, to think that's the cooler part of himself, right? Is the superhero one, because that's exactly who he always wanted to be. Unfortunately, he just can't be that guy at school. Unfortunately, he can't be that guy to go pick up girls. He can't be the guy at the beginning of the movie who's like, hold on tight, girls, and got two girls in his head. He can't be that guy all the time. And so I love that that's the thing that he chases. I don't think he only goes out at nighttime doing his own solo missions because that's the good thing to do. That's also, I think, the part of himself where he feels like he's powerful, where he feels like people accept him, where he feels like he's actually doing something versus the handicapped kid, right, who can't defend himself in high school. And so I love that they kind of use that as a device for Anne to get to him, for Anne, who low-key didn't even know that was him, right in front of her face in the first place. But it turns out to be him. And I think that's also a little bit what makes it different. A lot of times you see a story like that, the love interest who's trying to infiltrate knew exactly where the person was she was trying to get to. versus it being the person that she ends up liking. You know what I'm saying? I think that's what made it different. She was like, oh shoot, they the same person. That's what made it feel different. It was like, damn, now what do I do? Kind of type thing. And I think that added an interesting dynamic to the movie.
Yeah, he's also a character where I think you see you see some really you see some really cool things to happen where at that particular age, all those things that he does is it's what somebody at that age would want. It's what they would try to do. They would try to aspire to be something even more of what they are right now. They're envisioning possibly the best version of themselves. And so for him, that is going out to be a superhero at night doing his own missions. And it makes him not only feel good, but it also gives him that added confidence that he's looking for that he might not experience on a day-to-day in school, and he's even doubting himself when he meets Anne. He's like, I don't have a chance in hell with this girl, but she's looking at him for who he is. Like when she points to him and touches him on his chest and calls him a hero, it's when he's a boy. It's not when he's the older version of himself. And so, as you said, she sees him for who he is, and she sees the heart that he has and the bravery that ultimately he has in the situation, which is a really scary situation to be in. Let's talk about Grace Carolyn Curry, who plays Mary, who is notably the oldest of the family. She was the oldest in the first one, of course, and she is of college age right now. But we find out in this film that she ultimately does not attend college. One of the interesting pieces of that first film is that Grace Carolyn Curry's character, she gets into college. That was one of like her main story points. And ultimately, when they reveal the Shazam family at the end, they did have an older actress portray her. But now in this movie, they have essentially given her double duty. She's not only playing her regular version, but she's also playing the actual superhero version of herself. But what did you think about her, sort of having the wisdom, the older sister element to this family that I think is desperately needed, because it's the one person that if anybody can kind of keep things straight, even though Billy is the de facto leader, so to say, she's the one that can add in that new level of wisdom, that new level of insight, even though she might just be a couple of years older than everybody.
Yeah, I think, she'll always add something, being the oldest, the older sister. She's also, outside of these movies, probably the second most important Shazam character. Mary is actually pretty important in the comics. Look her up, go figure it out. She's in a bunch of other stuff too. But here I think she has an important role to play as the big sister. And there are times I wish we got slightly more of her, right? Where I was like, dang, I don't know, where is she in this moment? She could have told, Billy to not do this stupid thing or do that stupid thing. But I love that as the family is trying to reason, she always does feel like a mentor as well as like a chaperone sometimes, even though it's like, dang, she shouldn't have to feel like a chaperone, but you could tell she feels like a chaperone a lot of, especially when they're like writing the letter and other things like that. She's like, all right, guys, let's put our heads back on straight kind of type character. And so, like you said, it's very much needed. She does what she needs to do as well. The actress Grace Carolyn Curry, she does what she needs to do. I think there's nothing much to add or not add about her. But it's fine. I think she does what they give her and she excels at that.
Yeah, she's one of those characters where she's kind of half there in terms of her presence, because I think the character is written to be more academically focused at this particular time in her life. Like she wants to go to college, like that's her whole deal. And now she kind of feels like that she can't, because she needs to stay here and be with her family and be a part of the superhero team. And Billy obviously wants that out of her because he's leaning on her for her advice and for her counsel, right? So she's sacrificing her own desires to just stick behind. And I thought that again was an interesting thing that they did not really develop and really embellish throughout this movie. It's just like slightly touched on in the beginning, like she has a textbook because she is like studying something, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And then we see her still also have a social life, like she goes out and gets like wasted probably at a party, and she comes to their
you mean the eye doctor
their next team meeting, and she's very much hungover. And so those were like small tidbits to kind of point to where she was as a character. But as we said, like it's such a big ensemble that they're dealing with. They have to take away certain things to service the story at large, which is unfortunate, because I think she's also a really good actress in this movie too. I think that she does a really good job with the material that is given to her, but we just can't see her excel even more. She's just kind of there as that presence of an older sister, but doesn't really get to execute upon it that much. I do want to point out something that kind of bugs me, and I know you have like a couple of like plot holes or maybe plot conveniences, but one thing that stood out to me is the fact that because Grace Carolyn Curry is portraying both versions of the character of Mary, when they go and do the bridge rescue, their foster parents are definitely watching the news when this is all going down. Like, they don't recognize Mary on the news
That's
at all. Like,
true.
they don't see her. Like, everybody else looks different, yes, but like Mary as a character doesn't change anything about her except the costume. Like, she's not wearing Clark Kent glasses. She doesn't have a cowl on. Like,
That's
there's
true.
nothing obscuring her face. And I thought that was just like a curious choice. Like, they're all over the news. They're doing interviews, talking to the media and the press, but like their parents just so happen to miss her face on the news. That just kind of stood out to me. I thought that was a weird choice.
I remember there was the moment where they were talking to the press. I do have a question. Do you remember if she was one of the ones talking to the press? I know it was for sure. It was Freddie was talking
Freddie
to the
definitely
press.
was.
I think
And maybe he's
it
the
might have been
mouthpiece.
Eugene.
Yeah.
I think Eugene might have been around, but I'm wondering if she was around. I'm wondering if maybe, I know that it's still a plot hole at the end of the day, but I'm wondering if like maybe she's like avoiding the cameras as much as possible versus like Freddie, who very clearly doesn't look like young Freddie. You know what I mean? It's just like talking to the cameras. I wonder if she avoids press because of that exact thing. I will also add that Victor, their father, was about to pick up on it for a second. He was like, did you ever notice that these kids, and he was like, wait a second, I need to go check on them, but then they popped up, you know what I mean? So I'm like wondering, maybe he was about to be like, wait, that looks a lot like blah blah blah, you know what I mean? But I think it's also like the disbelief that our kids can be anything, you know what I mean? The disbelief that our kids can be any kind of superhero, that like you can see somebody that looks like them on TV and be like, nah, that's not them. Like, it doesn't even come to your mind. But I agree. That's a great point. That's a great point.
We just, the parenting in this movie, it's one of those things where I'm just like, okay, y'all, like, the house is getting struck by lightning all the time, and you don't think that that's weird all of a sudden. And now that this team, the Philadelphia Fiascos, is a thing, we all know that they exist. You can't correlate that at all. Also,
and have lightning powers.
Also have lightning powers, and I think use them actively. Also, Billy, out of nowhere, he has a code word. Hey guys, it's a great day in Philadelphia. And he just says it in such a way where it's like, what are y'all doing? Like, what are you about to go do? It's just, some of those things where it's like, I can let it go. It's still, it's a fun thing, right? It's one of those fun things to get them to transition to being superheroes. But, maybe with Mary, she was able to bypass the camera. She does have I think like they all do. She was actively using like her speed abilities. Like when she was rescuing people, she was moving super fast, like almost instantaneously. So perhaps that's the out. Like we just didn't notice her on TV because she was moving so fast. So good point. Let's move on and talk about Megan Good and Faith Herman, who played Darla. So Darla is the youngest of the family, if I'm not mistaken. And so Faith Herman, had a lot to do in that first movie because of just her adorable nature. She is this young, really lovable character. And then the older counterpart is played by Megan Good in this movie. I guess her particular role is just kind of that really sweet, just endearing member of the family that just often gets distracted by the cutest things in life, which is totally understandable because at her age, what do you really care about? You probably care about 5 things, and that's the cute, really adorable things in life. And so we get to see her really excel at that. But she's also super smart too, really caring individual. I think she's one of the more lovable members of the family. We often see, like, in the first movie, at least, she tried to connect with Billy very early on, and Billy was hesitant to allow her in. And then ultimately we see him embrace her. I think they tried to continue some of those threads into this movie, maybe not so successfully, but what did you think about, what both Faith and Megan brought to the role of Darla in this film?
I think this is one of the closer counterpart pairings in the group where it feels like the younger version is like the older version. I think Megan Good does a really good job of, I think, echoing and mirroring what Darla has going on for the most part. She always feels like Darla to me, even though I'm looking at Megan Good, it's always like, oh man, this is a little girl. You know what I'm saying? It always feels like that just because the way I think they play it, man. But this is low key like one of the caregivers of the group. Like she just cares about everybody. Darla is she's the hugger. She put Skittles in Barry's pocket to make her feel better about her day. You know what I'm saying? She's always, even though she is one of the youngest, if not the youngest, she always has the I don't know, something about her who she's always wanting to look out for other people. And I love that about her. I love that nature of her. She even she had more to do than the other 2 brothers for sure. I think in this movie where she has a lot of comments about when they're writing the letter. She has a lot of comments. She's the one that goes and sees if Hespera is still in the in the cell. She has the moments, of course, with the unicorns, which is crazy. She has a decent amount of screen time actually, for her character to shine. At least, and I love that they called back to the unicorns as she was making a whole unicorns versus, I forgot what it was. What was it? Unicorns versus something at the beginning of the film. She had a whole thing about that. So I love how they called back to that. But man, I love this pair. I think they do a great job. And yeah, I love seeing them every time they're on screen because they do bring a lot of, I think, of that innocence to the film. And then you get that one moment where she's on top of the unicorn. She out here cussing on top of you. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Are you supposed to be saying that, young lady? But yeah, I love what she brings to the table.
Yeah, kind of fearless too, right? Like kind of just not really having too much fear when it comes to these really just wild and crazy situations. And I think actively as like a younger kid, I think we're often fearless in that respect because your limits haven't really been tested. And as you get older, you start to test your limits and what you're capable of and what you can and cannot do. But at the age that she's at, she's still kind of in that area of like, well, what's there really to be afraid of? Like if something is like obviously scary, okay, but if there's a way around it, if there's something that's not like actively life threatening, then I'm going to be okay. But she has several key moments, and I agree about the pairing of the two, where you see Megan Good actively still act like a very young little girl, which is nice. You know, I think it's really cool to see that come to the forefront. She does have that big moment, which I want to revisit in the final act, and just like what they have to do with the unicorns in that whole moment, because it's pretty integral to what happens with the final battle. But let's move on and talk about the next member of the Shazam family, and that's Ross Butler and Ian Chin, who play Eugene Choi. And so this member of the family, I think, is the smart member, you know, really of the family, like the really scientific, nerdy version of the character, but also like strong as hell too, like one of the stronger members of the family when we get to see them flex their muscles. Not a ton to do in this film. I think, again, another case of where you saw a little bit more out of these two characters in the first movie, but a couple of key moments here and there. I think Eugene as a character is also sometimes a little aloof, like maybe is more interested in playing video games as opposed to like going out and being like a superhero, but still always actively present when it's time to show up and help out the family, of course, and when it's time to go on another mission. What'd you think about both Ross and Ian and what they brought to the character of Eugene?
Man, I wish they use Eugene's brains a little bit more. As you see, I was kind of alluding to it at the beginning in the bridge scene where he's like using his lightning, trying to tie up the cords, you know? And I was like, dang, that's smart. Imagine if like the family all caught on at the same time, but he couldn't do it by himself and the bridge ends up falling. As we can see, I wish they leaned into that a little bit more where he's like, okay, hey guys, what about this thing? You know, or what about that thing? And they really don't give him, I think, the time to blossom, I think, completely as a character. Of course, he has his moments where he's like, he is the guy going mapping out all the doors in the Rock of Eternity and stuff like that. But yeah, I wish they gave him a little bit more of that I'm a gamer brainiac feel, you know what I mean? That he could bring to the table. But man, other than that, I think he did fine. I wish they gave even a little bit more to young Ian too. I know we're talking about overall like the balance between the two. You can only do so much, right? But there's even like, I don't know, even like when they're on the back of the unicorns and you see Ian in the back. For a second, I was like, oh yeah, that's who that is. Like, I don't know. He just always fades to the background more than young Darla does, more than young Pedro does. He just feels like he fades to the background a little bit more than the other kids. And it's something about it I haven't quite put my finger on. But yeah, I think young, Ross Butler or Ian Chin should, I don't know, they should have found a way to give him one or two more lines to be like, oh yeah, that's who that is, that's that kid. So yeah, I like what they gave him to do, but I wish they gave him just give me two more lines from young Eugene.
Yeah, there were moments throughout the movie where you would see like a lot of the characters framed up in one single scene, and I was like looking for where everybody was, like where is so and so, or where are they at? And sometimes they would be accounted for, and sometimes they weren't. It was kind of, I think, it wasn't really an issue, but there might have been a couple of times where it was somewhat challenging just to know like what's the spatial like placement of everybody, like where is everybody right now? Like I even had a moment with Freddie's character where he wasn't present, and I had to remember like, oh yeah, he left to go do something else, or he's probably dealing with Anne right now, so that's why he's not present here. And so sometimes that proximity to where everybody is can become a bit of a challenge when you do have so many characters. But the character of Eugene here, again, like you said, the brainiac of the group, could have been utilized more. But as a key component to discovering what lies behind the doors of the Rock of Eternity, that is an important function. That is definitely something you need, like somebody who's going to just like take their time to go see what's behind those damn doors. Who knows what they'll encounter? I mean, he ran into all sorts of shit. There was that moment where he was just covered in like ooze, and it's like, bro, what is that? Like that looks disgusting. I hope that that's not nothing toxic or harmful to you, but it was cool to see like the Rock of Eternity not be forgotten about in this film, and the fact that you have like this really weird mythological stuff that could be placed upon any particular door. There's probably Greek shit behind this door, and maybe some Egyptian stuff, and weird dragons lie in this domain, all that stuff. But as a fanatic of like that type of fantasy storytelling, you often want to see like, well, what would happen if he went through that door? Like, what's going to be the ramification? We saw what happened to him with like one particular instance, but they didn't really revisit it all that much. But definitely, again, I think an important function to the whole group. We should also talk about DJ Catrona and Jovan Armand as Pedro Pena, who in this movie, Pedro, well, at least in the first movie, Pedro's like a really quiet individual. I don't think speaks at all. Maybe speaks like one line towards the end of the movie.
Yeah, he's
very
quiet.
much to himself, shy, doesn't say a lie, very soft spoken. The younger version of the character has more lines. Jovan Armand has more lines, and also has a little bit more of a story arc here. We find out that the character is gay. That's like a whole beat that's sort of built up to. It's introduced very early, and then they pay it off at the end. And then DJ Catrona, who plays the older version, is another counterpart who I think has a little bit of a reduced role in favor of the younger version of the character. So the balance felt a little bit off between those two, but at least in terms of their role and what they bring to the team, what did you think about, the character of Pedro here?
Back to Eugene real quick. I think Pedro even had more of an arc than Eugene does. You know what I mean? Even
Agreed,
Pedro had him again coming out to the family, and the whole family's like, well, we know that was one of the cutest moments in the movie to me. Everybody was like, "Oh," I was like, "Yeah, that's pretty cool." But at least he had that. Eugene never had like I don't know. Darla had something to do. Mary had something to do. It really feels like Eugene didn't have anything to do. But I love that Pedro at least had something to do here. Again, he has an arc. They're talking about he's not good at dodgeball. That's a whole thing that they give to him too. He is like the first one to lose his powers from the Daughters of Atlas. And yeah, man, I still just love his presence. I love Jovan Armand. I think plays him pretty spot on or perfectly in what he needs to do. And again, although he has a reduced role, I think he does great at that. So yeah, it's cool to see him, I think, return, because I don't know, after the first film, again, the kids, you never know. People get older, you know what I'm saying? And I wasn't sure how they would maintain all these kids and what would happen. But really, I'm happy to see everybody come back. But even Jovan Armand with DJ Catrona. It's crazy because low-key Ross Butler and DJ Catrona are like, ain't DJ Catrona like 40 something, bro?
Yeah,
I swear
they're
DJ
getting up
Catrona's
there.
like 40 something. They getting up there. So it's crazy to see them even active here. But again, cool to see them interact the rest of the family.
Well, I'm glad you said that, though. That's often one of the challenges when you're dealing with young kids in any project, film or TV. Like, we see it all the time. Harry Potter, Stranger Things, like these kids age up very rapidly. Like at that particular time in your development, the changes are extremely apparent. You'll be 5'7" one day, and then a year later you're 6'2", and you can't hide that, and people's voice gets deeper. I wonder if there were challenges with that, behind the scenes. I would imagine that there probably had to be. I don't know if that might have contributed to, maybe some of the choices with Asher Angel not being on screen as much. Maybe if that's like something that affected them in production, because Asher Angel is 20 playing a 17-year-old. And so that can become a little bit of a key difference there. Maybe that was a similar situation. It's also important to note that they filmed this movie in like 2021. So I think that they got them right on the cutoff where it might have started to become a little bit weird and very apparent, like, these aren't kids anymore. Not really. Like, some of them are actually like becoming grown adults, and I think if they had filmed it even just a year later, they would have run into some issues. Do you think that might have contributed to just maybe some of the imbalance that we saw, the fact that maybe the kids did not have as much to do here as we would have liked to see in this film?
Yeah, I think that's kind of possible. I'm really not sure. I will say they do introduce them all as kids, and they think they do a good job of being like, look, everybody, they're older, kind of type thing at the beginning of the film, where before they go out to do the bridge mission, they do kind of do a wrap around the room, right, of what everybody kind of looks like, where Pedro's watching baseball, everybody's kind of doing their own thing. So I don't know. It's really hard to tell. We'd have to ask like an insider, like, hey, did this mean anything? Or yeah, did their ages have anything to do with the production of this film? I think maybe a little bit to an extent, for sure. At least mainly at least Asher Angel, in particular, perhaps, where it's like, all right, man, your voice is getting too deep, man. You're 20 now. Like,
You got a beard, bro? Like, what's going on?
I don't know how much longer people can believe if you're on screen for too long is of how old you are. So, man, who knows? I think that's definitely a good guess of at least one thing that could be part of that.
I mean, that stuff can actively happen for kids while they are literally filming. Like, it's that rapid where his voice can sound like one thing one day, and then 2 days later,
That's
it is
crazy.
not the same. It's very, very possible. And I do wonder just about the state of this character, which we will talk about more so later as we close out things. But let's just hypothetically say they do a Shazam 3 with the same characters. Like, Asher Angel's not going to be a kid anymore. And that's the whole dichotomy of the character of Billy Batson. Like, Asher Angel, let's just say that they can get this movie done in 4 years, within the next 4 years. It's going to be 24 playing what? 18? Maybe possible. Maybe they can do a little bit here and there to make it believable. But I do think that with the passage of time, it becomes a little bit more challenging, where the disconnect between the older, sort of Billy Batson as a superhero versus like the kid version, the line is going to be super thin at that point. So I just think about that too as we were watching the movie. But let's keep moving on here. Let's talk about Djimon Hounsou coming back as the Wizard. Had a very, very small presence in the first movie, was really there to just bestow the powers of Shazam onto Billy Batson. So not a ton to do in the first movie. Certainly an increased role this time out. Had a lot more to do here. And I think that this is one of the cases where, in service of one character, sometimes, you have to maybe reduce some of the roles and responsibilities of others. But I'm actually happy Djimon Hounsou had a lot to do here, just because, like, the guy is criminally underutilized in almost everything he does these days. Like, this is a 2-time Academy Award nominee. Like, he's been in some very notable stuff. He's worked with world-renowned directors. He's worked alongside Steven Spielberg, and he's been in movies with Leonardo DiCaprio. He's extremely decorated, but I find that often his talents are just not utilized to their fullest potential. And he's talked about this recently in an interview. He talked about just the pay scale and how he feels like in all his years of acting, he still doesn't get paid fairly compared to his counterparts. And I can absolutely see that. There's a lot of implications as it relates to that with his race and his ethnicity and all of that stuff. But him coming into here, it did feel like that they wanted to do more with the Wizard character and give him more to do, give him more responsibility, and also have him interact more with not only the Greek mythological stuff, but also just the Shazam family, because that's really his direct connection to the human, quote unquote, world. What did you think about what Djimon brought to this particular role and just everything he had to do as it relates to the story?
And it was a pleasure to see him. And low-key, one of the surprises of the film for me was seeing how just how present he was. I didn't expect him to have, I think, as big as a role as he did. And like you said, this man, he's been in Hollywood so long and been in so many important, notable movies, from Blood Diamonds to Gladiators to Never Back Downs to this dude he's just been here. and he is Loki, and to me, another one of the legends that happened to exist in the film with Lucy Liu and Helen Mirren. He's like, oh shoot, Djimon Hounsou is also here to guide us through this movie. And so man, I loved everything that he had to do. He also has comedic time, and one of the best parts of the movie, of course, is when Anne and I don't know why I keep forgetting these characters' names, man. Freddie are talking.
It's a lot of characters, so I get it.
It's also because he kept messing up his name, so I was about to call him Jeffrey or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And Freddie, and she, yeah, they just have a lot of good moments where Djimon Hounsou gets to react, and it's like the greatest reaction ever. He rolls his eyes, he does what he needs to. I think as the Wizard, man, I love how Freddie's telling him, "You're no wizard, you can't do this." And he's the one that finds the door. You know what I'm saying? He has a character arc, because the gods are low-key mad at him. He's one of the people that helped steal the powers. You know what I'm saying? I think that's a whole thing that didn't also really get talked about completely, because it makes the Wizard low-key feel like a villain that's now a hero from a different time, if that makes sense. I wish they harped on that a little bit more as well. But man, I love that again, that the wizard is here. The person who gave all these kids their powers is present. That doesn't always happen, right? He kind of feels like the Zordon, low key, of what's going on here. I just think it's cool. And I thought it made sense in service of the story, and him and Jack Dylan Grazer, I think, did a good job of, again, just playing off of each other back and forth throughout the movie.
Yeah, one of those things, Wizard as a character is probably old as hell, like thousands and thousands of years old, but now he has like the sarcasm of modern day humans because he's probably been around humans enough to know that comedic timing that you're talking about, like those moments where he's rolling his eyes when they're talking about how they admire and love each other, and he's like, oh, that's cute. Or when they fall down in the pit and Freddy is just like going on and on about how he wants to save Anne and he wants to be there for her, and he's like, oh, feelings. That must be so nice and convenient that you're thinking about that right now as the world is ending, right? So it's all good stuff. And again, I think utilizing just the talents of Jimon Hansu, like he can be serious, he can give you that gravitas that I think you need as a character who knows this history, who can bring all of that mythology to what this story is ultimately really imbuing all throughout this film, but also just still be lighthearted too at the end of the day and have like modern sensibilities and just kind of be like a modern day take on the character, of somebody that has probably seen all sorts of shit. I mean, who knows what Wizard has seen throughout human history? I mean, he's probably been through it all, so I think now he's just in that place of like, okay, we have to make sure that these daughters of Atlas don't take over the world, and now we have to get the Shazam family to actually believe that they can save the world. We have to get Billy Batson to believe that he is capable of saving the world and being a hero, because Billy is doubting himself, especially towards the end. He doesn't think he's worthy, and I think that's an important function of the character of Wizard to remind him, like, you are worthy. I chose you for a reason. This was no accident. This was by design. This is why you are the most capable. And so he had all the elements to make a great character in this outing, to have somebody that you can relate to, have comedic fun with, but also somebody that actually helps really elevate the story of our main antagonists, or excuse me, protagonists and our heroes. So I think that was all really, really great stuff that he brought to the role. In his story, he's very much connected to the Daughters of Atlas, which we should get to. The villains of this movie, we'll talk about them individually in a second here, but as a whole, I want to just kind of focus on just their introduction into this movie and just like their purpose for being here. So one of the key things about this film is the fact that it does start off introducing them at first, at least Helen Mirren and Lucy Liu as Hespera and Calypso. We first see them arrive at this museum in Athens, Greece, to retrieve the staff that was ultimately left behind at the end of the first movie. And it's a very violent opening. Like it's pretty shocking how crazy it gets in those opening moments of the movie. But it was a pleasant surprise because I didn't see it coming. Just like how much viciousness they had in retrieving the staff. What did you think about just that whole moment and how it unfolded? The fact that they turned people to stone, people's heads were getting cracked all throughout that museum. It was just a lot going on.
I think it was one of those things I was looking forward to in terms of the surprise darkness in the film, right? I'll never forget Dr. Savannah in that first movie where he's testing outdoors and the one girl goes to grab the door and gets disintegrated. And there's the other moment where they're in the office and he's just like throwing people through the windows with the sins. And I was like, what is this movie? And so I felt like this movie had to have some kind of dark follow-up to that, right? Where like something is going down with somebody. And it was at the beginning of the movie. And I absolutely love how dark it got. I love how Helen Mirren and Lucy Liu just walk in, and what is that guy's name? The museum orator. I always try to remember the actor's name, but he's been in a lot of stuff recently.
Not sure.
And he's funny every time, but it's something about that contrast of this dude with like this comedic tone, and then all of a sudden they turning people to stone, and they're sitting like Lucy Liu's character, Calypso, is whispering in ears, and everybody's eyes are turning colors, and they like are giving it to each other. She literally has the power to make people zombies. I think that's crazy. I think that's insane. It's an insane power. But yeah, what a crazy way I think to start a film, because everybody in that room died, right? They turned them all to stone.
Pretty much.
I wish they like talked about it a little bit more. Like the newscast was like, look, everybody, all these people just got turned to stone by these two individuals. They do have the newscast really quick, but it wasn't as flashy as I thought it should be. Because to me, that's a big news item. Everybody in the world should know about those two people. But I liked it. I really liked that as a beginning. I love how you tell us that these villains are serious in the beginning. give us these ain't nobody, these people ain't nobody to mess with. And I think they did that pretty well.
Yeah, it was super effective to present us with an extremely formidable threat. Like, these are thousands of years old goddesses who are on a warpath to retrieve what they feel like was stolen from them. And so they instantly establish them as a credible threat, somebody that's people that are going to be very vicious and violent. And also, I think what was effective, at least in the beginning moments of the movie, was establishing the power dynamics between the three sisters, right? Like, just understanding like, well, who's in charge here versus who's the hothead versus who's the more empathetic one. That was stuff that was, I think, very much teased out along the film as we progressed all throughout through it. We kind of lost it at the end of it, but I think that was like really effective stuff too. But yeah, that opening sequence was it was pretty shocking just to see it get that violent and crazy. Like, Lucy Liu at one point, like some guy tried to grab the staff from her and she just tossed him, and I swear his neck snapped on like one of the stone statues. Like, it was crazy how violent it was. And I'm like, are we sure that this is PG-13? But good stuff, and good way to see like their powers develop too. But Helen Mirren here coming in as Hespera, she is like the one in charge, at least for most of the movie, right? And so I think one of the things that kind of gets mixed up sometimes throughout the story between her and Lucy Liu as Calypso is like, what do they really want? Like, what's the true motivation here? Like, we know that the staff was like something that they wanted to get. They got that back. They also had to confront the Shazam family to understand, like, well, who are these challengers, quote unquote, with these powers? Like, we have to make sure that we address this and take care of this and nip this in the bud. But then also, like, the staff was a MacGuffin, and then they introduced like another MacGuffin with the apple that they retrieved to like restore their world and create new life and restore their whole existence, essentially. And they were also, I think, simultaneously trying to avenge their father, Atlas. It just felt like it was kind of all over the place. Helen Mirren, I think, tried to do her best to recenter the group and to just like make us connect with her, because she does have that moment with Billy where she's explaining to him, like, how would you feel if somebody stole something from you? What would you do? Like, that was a really effective moment to write and to get us to understand, like, well, what do they want? But then you have Calypso, played by Lucy Liu, where it's like, oh, she's just crazy. She just wants to fucking take over, and she's willing to do it by any means necessary. Did you find yourself lost with just like all the mythological stuff and just their motivations and how they, sort of introduce those elements to the story?
Yeah, I'm not always in this camp, but I think this would have been a good movie to say, here's a flashback. You know what I'm saying? Here is
That's fair.
The wizard taking, or you know what I mean, and all of his people taking powers or whatever they were doing away from the daughters of Atlas, or their dad, Atlas himself, right? Like, have Atlas in the flashback, have the wizards or whatever they were called back then in the flashback, and tell us what happened. Then we come back to present day, and we can see why they care so much about this thing. Of course, Calypso's whole thing was, our main thing is to avenge our dad, but like, why do we care about him? You know what I'm saying? Like, why is he so important in all of this? I really love that moment between Helen Mirren and or I guess Hespera and Billy Batson with the sit down with the Philly cheesesteak spot, right? Because it's like, it's one of the moments where we, like you said, we actually get dialogue from the antagonist of like, how would you feel if this happened to you? Sure. And she kind of lays it out, and I was like, dang. That's one of my favorite parts in the movie, just because it made sense. That's what makes villains good to me a lot of times. It's like, is this a villain that just made sense? Did they just say something that actually, that I said, oh, I get that, or oh, I would feel this way. And when they say things of reason, it makes you go, well, shoot, you have a little bit behind you, right? But that's like the only time where I really felt like that. The only time where I really felt like there was like meat behind, I think, what they were after. I like their powers. I like that. I love their ambition. I love going after people and all this and that. But I was looking for, I think, a little bit more out of their story. It feels like it's all over the place because it's just not focused. Like I said, like it is. I feel like, again, a quick exposition dump, 10-minute flashback is enough for me. I think that would have fixed a lot about how we felt about them. Because then they could have talked about even the small exposition they do, of course, within their own dialogue. They could have talked about a little bit about something else, a little bit about their family dynamic, why Lucy Liu, maybe Lucy Liu should have been closer to Atlas than Hespera was for some reason. You know what I'm saying? That's why she wants to avenge him so much more than maybe Anthea does or Hespera. I don't know. I feel like there was ways in which they could have got us there that still serviced the story and not made us lose sight of the rest of the film. You know what I mean? And they just didn't do it. So yeah, I'm with you, and I think we're in agreement there.
Yeah, we just didn't know enough about them. Like, we knew more about the devices in which had to be acquired than we actually knew about the characters. Like, they spent more time talking about the staff, and they spent more time talking about the apple. And it's like, well, I don't give a fuck about a MacGuffin. I want to know about the characters. Like, that's who I really want to focus on. And there's like that point, I think in the middle of the film, where we see the Shazam family at the Rock of Eternity. They go into that room that has all the books, which creatively was really cool to see. It felt like Harry Potter-ish, like what they were trying to do. Books were flying around, and they had just endless amounts of resources at their disposal. But they spent most of the time in that particular moment with heavy Greek mythological exposition, just talking about all this stuff that I'm just like, okay, you're really weighing down the momentum of this movie. You're kind of alluding to just the Daughters of Atlas a little bit. You're talking a little bit about Atlas himself, but it just didn't feel like enough. And even the way that it was presented, it wasn't engaging. Just that's really what it all comes down to. It wasn't engaging. It's more interesting when you do get a character themselves talking about their existence, or you can get Rachel Zegler earlier in the film when she's talking with Freddie at the school lunchroom. She's alluding to her older sisters being overprotective. We don't necessarily, or we're not supposed to, I guess, know that she's related to the Daughters of Atlas, even though it's very obvious. But she's talking about how one of them are super overprotective, and they don't think that they can handle themselves and all that stuff. Like, those are really, I feel like those are organic ways to allow us to get to know them better. And instead, they kind of opted for very obvious stuff, which is just like these conversations between them. Like, Lucy Liu is just like really headstrong. She's just yelling like, we should have done this a long time ago, and you gave them too much opportunity, and why are you trying to work with them? And it's like, okay, that's just not as interesting to me, you know? And so I think it kind of weighed down the film. But Rachel Zegler is kind of the more empathetic version of these three. Like, they are representing sort of three different points. We've already alluded to her and her relationship with Freddie Freeman and how that was established early on. Her powers are also interesting. I don't know what to make of them. It's like universe reality altering stuff. It kind of reminded me of Doctor Strange a little bit, like what she's able to do and change up the makeup of skyscrapers and buildings and do all this really weird stuff. It looks cool. I do got to give it that. It looks cool. And I think in alignment with Hesper and Calypso, the costumes also looks really, really great. And we get a couple of points, like in addition to like the room with the books at the Rock of Eternity, we kind of see their version of a layer 2, where they're like on this Greek mountain. You know, they're on this mountain, and that's where they're sort of devising their plan. But what did you think about the look and the feel of these characters and how they're introduced into this world and just their power set and how they communicated all that stuff on screen?
Shout out to the actual set piece, I think, of the God world. I wish that world was slightly more fleshed out, right? But the way it looked, I thought was pretty decent. At least those statues on the outside, when I was like, dang, that looks pretty good. So shout out to that. These characters in general, man, I said it before, I really like Hespera's costume. I really like Anne's costume. Lucy Liu, to me, I don't know. Something was just all the way off to me. I didn't like her costume that much. I didn't like her performance that much. Her character didn't really have a reason, except she was trying to avenge her dad. I don't know. Something about that whole character was just not sitting completely well with me. But everything else to me, I really liked the way they looked, I think. And I really liked that you knew they were powerful. Like, Helen Mirren wasn't no punk. You know what I'm saying? Hesper wasn't no punk when it came to those fights. So I love that feel as well, knowing even when she was sitting there staring at Billy, I was like, man, this woman is scary. And I love how Billy calls that out too. He's like, you know, you really are, you know, one intimidating or whatever he said, woman or whatever. And they try to talk that out. But I love something about their presence does feel godly. I will give them that. Something about it does feel cool. Anthea's powers are really cool. The reality manipulation thing, I really like that. It's something about it where you don't see that often, at least in a character that does feel like they're in the in-between. You know what I mean? Maybe you get that out of a hero. Maybe you get that out of a pure villain, but you never get that out of somebody in the in-between. You don't see that power a lot. And I thought that was dope. The way I wish we'd seen it like one more time. Unfortunately, her powers got taken too. I was like, dang. But yeah, I thought it was cool, man, the way they felt. I also liked they felt like a mix between the Sanderson sisters and Charmed at the same time. It's some weird, like, medium there where they feel like charmed because they do feel like the Trinity. They do, and it's something about the Sanderson sisters where they feel, you could tell they're always yelling at each other for something, and it could be the smallest thing, but you can always tell they're yelling at each other. So yeah, I didn't mind their dynamic. Man, I just wish Lucy Liu brought it a little bit harder. That's really it, to be honest. I just wish she was like, between that and the motivations, I think, of them as a group, man, that was like the missing piece to me. That was like the thing I was like, dang, I would like them a little bit better if this third piece was a little bit better. But something about her, man, I was not on board with.
Yeah, I just feel like the writing for her was really, really bad, which translated to really bad delivery. I mean, she had just like standard generic villain lines like, "You think you can match me, you mortal?" Like shit, regular basic stuff. Like there's no depth to that. It almost felt like she was acting across somebody that was not Zach Levi or not like an actual actor. Like she might have just been there by herself at several points in time. So they really, I think that they really dropped the ball with her character. It just probably was a combination of bad writing and not great execution on her part. Conversely, though, I think Helen Mirren, like she had really good stuff. We've already alluded to a couple of moments. I think the moment when they're in, sort of their lair, the God world, that part where she's reading the note from the Shazam family is great.
Comedy.
She reads it just such in a deadpan way. She's like, "Dear daughters of Atlas, good one, Steve. Should we proofread?" Like that's really, really funny stuff. She's just reading it verbatim, very, very dry.
Accurate.
Very accurate. I'm just like, that stuff is great. Very, very charming moments. And again, we talked about Rachel Zegler. She is, I think, closely related to just like a normal human as any of them, because she is the youngest, even though she's 6,000 years old. Like, how the fuck old is Helen Mirren's character supposed to be? Like,
oh boy,
good grief. Like that is just a wide spread across their difference in ages. But yeah, they started off pretty hot, and then ultimately I think just became very regular, plain, ordinary villains. The most interesting stuff that they tried to do was just like switch their roles and their dynamic by then. Like Lucy Liu becomes like crazed and overpowered and maniacal almost, and Helen Mirren is the one who's kind of aiding in the Shazam family to take her down, because she realizes like, oh yeah, she's fucking crazy, we got to get rid of her, but she dies too. So just some stuff that got dropped along the way, which is unfortunate. But again, one of those cases of just a movie with probably too many characters if we're really thinking about it.
And a dragon.
Respect. Oh, and plenty of dragons, which let's talk about that. We should talk about the final act, because it gets crazy. So the final act of this movie takes place in the city of Philadelphia. Lucy Liu's character, Calypso, she's now in full control. She has this dragon called the World Eater. I think Leighton the World Eater is the name. So your standard generic comic book name for any all-consuming villain or monster. But she takes this apple, she plants it in the middle of the Philadelphia Phillies baseball stadium. Really tough beat for them. They're going to have a terrible season. And she creates this tree that has all these branches that just take over the entire architecture and makeup of the city. But it also like hatches eggs of many, many different Greek mythological creatures that just come and wreak havoc upon the city. Like there's a dragon, there's a minotaur, there's a cyclops, there's harpies. We see unicorns eventually. It's just a lot going on. I think that stuff, in terms of, having cannon fodder in a comic book movie, that's probably as interesting as you could get. Like, give us characters that we already kind of associate with Greek mythology that we're familiar with, but they don't really have a purpose or a function besides being cannon fodder. So I think that they mostly looked good. It's not the most interesting stuff in the world, but if you're going to have just like this big crazy battle in a major metropolitan area, this might be one of the more creative ways you can do it, even though, the execution might not have been all the way there. But what did you think about just the whole introduction of just all this Greek mythology at the end there? And it became like this big battle in the middle of Philly.
Yeah, it was the part, again, outside of whatever was going on with the Daughters of Atlas story that did feel the most Greek. I was like, oh, there's a Cyclops. Oh, like you said, there's a Harpy. Oh, I know these Greek creatures. I thought the Minotaur looked really good, by the way. Something about it.
Yes, I agree.
Minotaur looked really good. Something about it, I don't know, it was just cool, man. I think it's just the nerd in me that likes Greek stuff, that has played all these God of Wars and other Greek TV shows and movies and things, that just like seeing that stuff and like seeing how those were their foot soldiers, right? That they kind of could use. Those aren't no normal foot soldiers, you know what I'm saying? Those are some crazy. I really love the I don't know what the name is of the lion scorpion thing. But that thing is scary as hell, bro. That thing, I don't know the name of it, but that thing is wild. The way that thing comes out, stabs that girl and throws her through a window is what? Like where that was another part of the movie I didn't expect. It's also funny when they like hone in on, I think, a character in the movie that's not part of the main cast, but that is going through something. It's always a white woman in the movie. It's really funny. Like the woman in the beginning with the car, and then the woman that gets stabbed by the scorpion. I feel like there was one more, but I just thought that was funny. That was like white women.
Put white women in more peril. I love it. Let's do that more.
White women in shambles, man. But she got jacked up. It's also funny because when the vine was being made, and the white she's up against the car, she like lost her shoe, and I think it switches back to her. I think her shoe was back on, and it did not matter. She gets thrown through a window by a lion scorpion. It's like the craziest thing ever. Like you can't get that anywhere else but a comic book movie, bro. I thought that was pretty crazy to watch. But yeah, I thought that was cool that they use those characters. I wish there was like even I don't know, man. Sometimes it's just like, dang, could y'all explain that for 3 seconds? You know what I'm saying? Like, I wish there was like this Apple does this for their world. Like, they didn't really explain completely what the Apple was going to do to the world, except for refurbish it, right? And now they're like, oh, it's planted on Earth soil. Now it's corrupted. So you tell, like, if the Apple was planted on their Earth, do we still get these creatures? You know what I'm saying? Or is it just like, because it's on Earth, we get those creatures? I think that was something that was lost in translation because they just didn't really talk about it. It's like, did they happen to be here because they're on? I don't know. It was weird. I wish they talked more about that. But again, really love seeing the creatures. The unicorns, not Greek mythology, by the way.
Definitely not. That was an invention for this movie. They were like, oh, we just got to do something very different and weird here.
They said, let's throw in some unicorns, man. I actually love the inclusion because that first unicorn was low-key hella scary. And it gave Darla something else to champion. You know what I mean? I thought that was cool that they gave her something else to do in service of the film. So I actually really like the unicorns in this movie, but it was cool seeing everybody.
They gave her product placement to champion. That's what they did in this movie. They said, you're going to be the Skittles ad in this movie. I mean,
several times.
It was, yes. It was
like four times.
Admittedly, it was a funny moment. Like, I can't lie. When she said taste the rainbow,
it was funny.
Great line usage. I mean, David F. Sandberg, he says that they wrote that in. There was no Skittles tie-in when they wrote that stuff in. It was just like, why not use a real product? But it's also like, okay, we understand that this is a major motion picture that's going to have sponsorships. So sure, David, sure, that's what happened here. But yeah, they made sure to have a lot of Skittles here because she said taste the rainbow twice. But you know, I think to your point about the explanation and just like what is this apple supposed to do? You know, that just comes down. That's just standard comic book gobbledygook that they just are like, whatever, just do it. Who cares what it's supposed to mean? I mean, you know, that's one of those things we're always going to pick apart, but it's also like, okay,
that's fair.
We can't think too much about it. What I did like though about this final act, you know, sort of battle, I think one of the trends that we've seen over the past 10 or so years, we see sort of the lack of human cost in some of these big final battles. I love that this took place not only in a major metropolitan area, but the fact that we see so many humans deal with this shit. Like you talked about the girl that got chucked through the window and died and impaled by a scorpion. There were people and extras all throughout this stuff, running, screaming, trying to get away, trying to get to safety. And I feel like it's become a trend that's not really spoken about that much, where we don't get that. We don't get that that's often true. Because I think I think what happened after Man of Steel in 2013, where they just fucking
that backlash
decimated Metropolis. Like it was just like, people were like, well, damn, y'all killed like thousands of people. I feel like all the filmmakers and studios kind of got gun shy and started to like pull back on that a lot. Like you remember like Age of Ultron came out 2 years after Man of Steel. Yeah. And they had explicit moments in the movie where you can see the Avengers escorting civilians away from the catastrophe. Like, oh, get away, get out the city, evacuate, leave. They kept doing that. And then it just got to a place where we're just going to go to different worlds and different planets. Avengers Infinity War, all of it's on Titan, you know, out of outer space. And even in Wakanda, they're outside of the city limits, so the human cost can't really be that high. I just like that we kind of got back to a point in time where it's like, no, this is going to be in the middle of the city and people are going to die. There's going to be some
Yeah.
deaths and we have to see what that looks like. But we're still going to try to save the majority of these people at the end of the day. Did you pick up on that when you were watching it, that they just focused on so much of the humans and just like their scared reactions and their fear while this was all, sort of going on in the midst of just all the superheroic stuff that was also taking place?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because it was something about that pandemonium in the middle of the street felt different than everything else we had seen, I think, in recent years. Usually when you see people, they are just running, right? They are just like, this thing is coming. But not this movie. I mean, Harpies was picking up people, Minotaurs was running through people. It was a lot going on. It's something about that, again, that pandemonium, that craziness going on in the streets that, again, added that layer of, no, there's a risk here. It even added to Shazam's final I guess battle, right? Because it felt like he was actually saving something, if that makes sense, because you could see people perishing at the very same time. You know what I mean? So I thought that was important that they added that in there.
Yeah, one of the hallmarks of like those first Christopher Reeve Superman movies is the fact that like in the first Superman film, there's not really a villain. Like Lex Luthor is there, played by Gene Hackman, but most of the movie is about Superman getting his powers and him just like saving people. Like he's saving Lois Lane. He's trying to save the world from peril. He's like going to the Hoover Dam and he's flying around the like, it's cheesy to look
Superman
back on
stuff.
it now because it's early, but it's Superman stuff. And I think we kind of lose that, like superheroes being heroic, just saving people, like being out there on the street, on the ground. We get a lot of it with Spider-Man, of course, that's natural. But I think it's the stakes have raised over the years and we just get the endless beams into the sky and there's just like, what's going on here really? Like, where are all the people? Like, everybody's just, I guess everybody's inside, but really, like, everybody's just able to get past like this immediate threat that's like present on the city streets of New York or Philly or whatever it is. So I just like that they paid attention to that. There were real extras there. There were real people running from that pandemonium, as you said. Like, all that stuff felt very present and very immediate. But with the last portion of this final battle, we do get sort of a final standoff between Shazam and this dragon in the middle of the Philadelphia Phillies baseball stadium. They're going to have a really bad season. Tough beat for them. And there's this dome situation and the dragon can like paralyze you with fear. I guess that's like his power. It's not like a fire. Or is it a fire breathing? I can't even remember. Like, did he breathe fire at any point?
I think it is like blue fire. I think a couple times he was just about to eat people a couple times, but I'm pretty sure it was blue fire.
So yeah, they have like a bit of a final battle. I think one of the cool things was the introduction of like the lightning element with Shazam. Like, that is a character that has lightning power. So visually that stuff was nice to see. It was a little bit busy on the screen. There was a lot going on. It was very dark. You couldn't really make out what was happening, but there were a couple of visual cues where you can kind of see just the silhouette of Shazam. And his costume had almost kind of become like very blackened at that point because he had been struck by lightning, I think, a couple of times. So it looked really cool. He almost kind of looked like Black Adam at several points, but it just kind of resulted in him, using the staff, ultimately killing the dragon. He was able to harness the power of lightning that created this really big explosion. And we see Billy sort of perish. We at least think he dies. And there's a very emotional moment where he kind of passes on. We think he's gone. They bury him. And what they do here is sort of pay off this, I guess, this mini arc that was unfolding all throughout the movie with the character of Wonder Woman, in fact, in this film. And so we do get the presence of Gal Gadot here coming back as Diana Prince, and she is able to revive Billy after him perishing due to his wounds that he suffered at that battle. She's able to use the staff to bring him back to life, and he comes back as his adult form. But earlier in the movie, we see them like go on a date, but they don't show her face. Like, they're playing off of the gag from the first movie where we don't ever see Superman's face, and so they kind of lean into that here, but then they also just sort of pay it off with her actually being in the movie at the end of it. What did you think about, just the way that they wrapped that up and how they, sort of brought her in here to be the person that could help revive Billy and also make sure that there was going to be more than just one God present on this earth?
It's something I still haven't wrapped my head around completely, or really, I think, processed how I feel about it. I will say it is hella comic booky. I will give them that. It does feel, when it happened, I was like, okay, that would happen in a comic book. I was like, that felt accurate, but it's something about it being Gal Gadot still, or something about, the whole, we don't know where DC is going thing that just made it feel off. I feel like if we knew that she would be around, I wouldn't have cared, and I would have been like, oh, okay, I love that she's here. I still love that she was there. Don't get me wrong. I will always love hearing the Wonder Woman theme. It sounds great every time. It's something about it. It's like, oh shoot, something's about to go down. It's a really good theme. Also, I just love seeing Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. I think she's a good Wonder Woman, so it was like, oh, it's good to see her too. But something about that moment, because of knowing that outside of this movie is going on, felt weird. And I couldn't really I still can't really put my finger on it, because I don't know. Part of me was like, did we earn this kind of type thing? Part of me felt like, is this something that, I don't know, where are we going with that thing? Of course, if she is the last god alive and they throw her in there, I'm like, that makes sense to me. It did make sense to me in some ways, but yeah, I don't know. It's something, again, I still have to figure out. I didn't mind seeing her, but I do have thoughts around, I guess, the why they decided to include that in the film completely.
So I will say this, from a story perspective, like within the confines of the movie, this is a clear cut Deus Ex Machina situation where it's like the most convenient plot device that you could have. It is very comic booky, but it's also like, wow, that just kind of came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden we're going to use her and conveniently bring Billy back to life. Now, I think that they tried to do a little bit more with what they alluded to earlier in the movie, where you see Billy on a date with her, even though you don't see her face. By the way, super funny delivery from Jimon Hansu, his head on her body. That was a weird visual, but also super funny when they did that. That was comedy. That was pure comedy.
That was very funny.
But for her to come back out of nowhere to just revive him on this rock, this Greek rock. How did she know they were there? How did she get there?
How did she know?
Why wasn't she present for the final battle? She can show up for this, but not to like help with the actual fight itself in Philly. She was in Philly because she went on a date with Billy. So it's like, where were you? What were you doing?
Well, that was a dream though, right?
Oh, it was. You're right. It was a dream. He did dream that he went on a date with her. But then, even now that you even said that, it's like, well, now that makes even less sense, because like she really had no reason to be there. It would be different if they actually went on the date and they didn't know each other.
Yeah,
because if they knew each other and she showed up because they had previously been on a date, I'd be like, oh, that makes sense. But because he dreamed it and he had that vision of Wizard popping up, now that makes even less. Oh man. So now I'm just like, what the fuck? That doesn't, from a story perspective, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
From a more outside contextual standpoint, which we were alluding to, just about the status of her as a character. I mean, Wonder Woman 3 has been canceled from Patty Jenkins, which doesn't necessarily mean the same fate for Gal Gadot as the character, but by all accounts, with the announcements of what James Gunn and Peter Safran rolled out, we don't have any indication that Gal Gadot is coming back. They have not reassured us as an audience like that's going to be our Wonder Woman. So even when she popped up in the movie, I'm sure you noticed this when we first saw the film and her music blared through the speakers, there was no reaction. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. It wasn't like this really, it was just like,
it was confusion.
It was very, it was very much confusion. Like, well, why is she here? And so I just fear that that's just like the general reaction to the whole inclusion of her character. It's like, well, why is she really here? She doesn't have a real reason to be here. That's a Deus Ex Machina situation. The third piece of it, which I want to get your thoughts on, they fucking revealed this in the marketing. They put out ads on TV for this in the marketing, which I don't know. For me, spells desperation. That's what it feels like. They probably knew that this movie was not tracking great. They knew that it probably was not going to perform that well in the box office, and so they decided to spill this info days before with TV spots. Apparently, it was a leak, quote unquote. I don't believe that. I feel like that they leaked it themselves, if anything, to try to get some excitement and drum up some anticipation for the movie. It kind of feels like a Black Adam situation with the whole Superman Henry Cavill thing that Dwayne Johnson pulled with that movie. Did that feel kind of apparent to you that, they were just like throwing this out there in the marketing to just try to drum up some sort of excitement and anticipation for this movie? Maybe get the last minute viewers who were probably on the fence to show up because they want to see Wonder Woman for 3 seconds.
Yeah, it definitely feels like that, especially, I'm sure at some point they were like, man, I'm sure their projection felt weird or somebody was like, oh, y'all don't know about this movie. we might have to throw Gal Gadot in here as Wonder Woman real quick to tell people that she's in this film. I even think that's interesting when you hear the news that at some point they were going to try a Superman cameo in this movie and a Batman cameo in this movie,
and
you're
a
like,
JSA cameo from some
and a
other
JSA
people.
cameo, yeah, and you're like, well, okay, I don't know. It definitely feels like, okay, we got to give him something, kind of type thing. After you hear kind of all the other cameos that could have been present, so yeah, it definitely feels like that, man. And I think the difference between this and the Black Adam ending is when Henry Cavill comes out as Superman, there's still an indication that that's possible. Versus when this happens, I guess it's way more unclear than it ever has been now to me. Because at one point you said Marvel, right? As a studio, they will cut a movie up into the end.
Yeah.
I believe that probably to be true for DC to some degree, right? To where they had plenty of time. If James Gunn said Wonder Woman is no more, to cut Gal Gadot out of this movie, bring him back to life with, I don't know, the Wizard still has some amount of power. You know what I'm saying? Do a reshoot for one day. Find another way to bring Billy back.
Just make it up. It's comics. Whatever can do.
Do something. I just don't see.
Man.
I don't understand the decision to keep it if you're not using her anymore. Versus Black Adam, where we're all like, oh shoot, Henry Cavill's back. This doesn't feel like that. This is like, this raises more questions than anything. Black Adam, to me, there wasn't a lot of questions versus when does the movie come out between these two. Versus now it's like, Wonder Woman, what do you have? Why are you here? Kind of type thing. Or like, what are they doing with you? So yeah, it was more confusion than anything for sure. And you could tell in the audience, nobody was like mad or anything. Everyone just like, okay, that's cool, but why? That's the what it felt like in the room. And yeah, I felt the very same way.
Yeah, and the questions unfortunately do not stop there. But before we get to like the post-credit scenes and just what we saw in those stingers, we briefly talked about Marta Milans and Cooper Andrews, who play the parents of the Shazam family, Rosa and Victor. Was there anything else you wanted to say about them? They did not have really anything to do. I felt like that they were just kind of watching TV the whole movie. They were relegated to just watching newscasts until the final act, where they could like actively be a part of the story and in the city. Mm-hmm. But anything else you wanted to add about their characters and what they contributed here?
I do like when they are on screen, they add something. Like, I always do feel like I'm around the Shazam family's parents because of how concerned they are with different things in the film. There is that one moment where Mary is like, wait a minute, you guys bought the house? Like, it felt like that was a very underrated moment that should have been. Again, these things don't need like 10 minutes of us talking about them, but give us 2 minutes where like the parents buy the house and everyone's like, oh my God, you did this thing. I don't know. Do something really fast to make us feel like that meant something. Because they say it so fast and they never really talk about it again. But yeah, I think Marta Milans did great with the moment she has with Billy at the end before he goes on his big thing. Again, although I didn't feel like we earned it 100%, it still felt really good. It was one of the more heartfelt moments of the film, with him finally calling her mom and stuff. So shout out to him, or shout out to her. And then there is the quick moment with Victor Vasquez where he's like, the battle wagon or whatever, the war wagon. Everybody hop in the war wagon. I was like, okay, that's kind of funny. That's a good moment. But yeah, I also really like the moment where the dragon comes to their basement, and it's like, how they
destroys their house.
Destroys their house, man. And one more line that she says that I actually like. She was like, I don't really know how to parent here, and I'm like, I don't think anybody would.
That's fair,
because her kids are just like superheroes, and they're not even. The ones in the van aren't even super no more, and they just walked out the van to go get some unicorns. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you tell them not to go? Do you? I don't know. But I really like every time they're on screen because they provide at least something to the movie. Some kind of form of, okay, this is the matriarch and patriarch of the family. This is the mom and the dad. They have something there, so I appreciate them for that.
Certainly, when they get an opportunity to play, they always execute and step up and deliver. You want more for their characters because they are so important, I think, to the family dynamic and just the makeup. They're very loving, very protective, of course, but they also realize that they are way out of their depth. They don't know what the hell is going on, and they don't know what they're going to do. Like, even when Darla tells them, or it might have been Mary, I can't remember who told them specifically, but when they're leaving the band to go to the unicorns, and they're like, yeah, make sure all these people get to safety, and they're both like, what? Like, we can't save anybody. It's just two of us. We don't have powers. It's small stuff like that they can help sort of communicate those feelings. But nice to see them nonetheless. I did want more for them. Let's talk about, sort of as we wrap up here, the two stingers that we got. We got a mid-credit scene and a post-credit scene. The questions continue to raise because the mid-credit scene was good, but it's also very confusing because what we see here is Amelia Harcourt and John Economos coming from the Peacemaker series and the Suicide Squad, essentially to recruit Billy to be a part of the Justice Society of America. And so he's like practicing his lightning powers on some bottles. They approach him. They essentially credit him like, you've done a good job. Amanda Waller has seen you. We'd like to recruit you for the JSA. He thinks he's getting recruited for the Justice League, which is the group that Wonder Woman is a part of because he has a crush on her. Not that group, another group. Now, we were introduced to the JSA in Black Adam. We saw a lot of those characters. We saw Hawkman. We saw Dr. Fate. We saw Cyclone. But Black Adam essentially is no more in the new DCU. This was clearly having some sort of connective tissue to that film, Black Adam. David F. Sandberg has also talked about that they wanted to get JSA cameos into this movie, but I don't believe anybody was available. So at the last minute, they had to make an audible and get the characters of Amelia and John Economos here to come recruit them. So they essentially accomplished what they set out to do, just with different characters that they had to swap out. But again, for a portion of this universe that's no longer going to exist, at least in the way that it's constructed now, this just felt weirdly out of place. Like, I liked what I saw, but I'm also just like, there is no JSA. That's not going to be a thing, at least not like in the immediate short term for what James Gunn and Peter Safran is going to do. So I just wonder behind the choice to keep it. I do wonder, like, well, why do you keep this in the movie? The second one made a lot more sense because you could still maybe do some sort of Shazam story with Dr. Sivana. But this one explicitly, when we know the state of Black Adam and we know that that's not going to be a thing that they focus on, and we know the JSA at least is not, again, a focus of the immediate short term, this just kind of felt like it was out of place for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what also throws me off is them coming from Peacemaker, a James Gunn property. You know what I'm saying? That's the thing that's like, what are we doing? I think that it just created more confusion inside of me because I'm like, I feel like James Gunn in some form or fashion has the power to be like, okay, we're not doing that anymore. But we do it anyway. And it's like, okay, is there actually something happening here or nothing happening here? Like, I kind of need to know, you know what I mean? As a viewer, it's just so much confusion on the board. Once you add that, Wonder Woman is one thing, right? Wonder Woman is like, okay, whatever. Like, she's a bigger, different character thing. But now James Gunn is tied to this thing. That's kind of at the end of this. And it creates, again, even more confusion. So I don't know what's happening here. If it's all throwaway, it is what it is. But I will say I don't mind the direction of them now putting Shazam in JSA. He has a JSA history. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's also a place where him and Black Adam could have hashed some stuff out. Like, it's a lot going on when Shazam is in JSA to that degree. And low key, you keep adding names to that. That's coming a cool little team. You know, I wouldn't imagine to see Aldous Hodge and Zachary. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't mind seeing some of that stuff. So yeah, it's just a lot of it's unfortunate and a lot of it's confusing. A lot of it's all over the place. And part of me is hoping, for just more direction by the end of all this, man. Tell us one more time that this movie means nothing. You can't tell us this movie means nothing and then have these like 2-3 Easter eggs of like, these things could be important. Don't do that. Don't do that. It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, it definitely took me out of it a little bit to try to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, because what you're also simultaneously doing, and this is a somewhat of a dangerous game, I would say, we have to remember the stuff we talk about here on this podcast, the stuff that we follow on film Twitter or from pundits and critics and experts, the people that are connected to this stuff and very much report on it and actively talk about it. This is a bubble. This is a very small portion of the audience that is very keenly aware of this stuff. Most people don't know about these things. Most people don't know necessarily that Black Adam is no longer going to be a thing. And I'm not underestimating how intelligent and how up on this stuff audience members are, because I know people who don't even follow this as closely as we do that know about a lot of this behind the scenes stuff. But I think the vast majority, like if your grandma goes to see this movie or if your aunt is wanting to check out Shazam 2, she's not going to know about JSA not being a thing and not moving forward. And so when you do add in these components of things that probably are not going to be paid off and then it just never happens, it's just like, well, what's going to happen with that? Are they ever going to like revisit that? No, probably not. It's very unlikely at this point. So it's just it's a weird dissonance that I think we're having between the actual reality of what the future of DC is going to be versus what we're seeing unfold on screen. Again, it's just a weird year, and I fear that we're going to see a lot more of this in the remaining 3 films. Like we're going to see more of this in The Flash, maybe Blue Beetle, but that feels so disconnected that I'd be very surprised if they do anything to connect to anything in that film. But Aquaman, there just might be some like strange, awkward stuff that we have to go through to just say like, yeah, it is what it is. But at the same time, like they took out cameos from The Flash. Like we saw reports like they took out stuff from The Flash to avoid confusion, but they didn't do that here. I don't know. I don't get it.
Maybe there's a reason.
There has to be something. There has to be something. I guess The Flash might be more integral to the future plans, and it might be more connected than we think.
I do remember when James Gunn was talking about all of this, he was like, Shazam is one of those characters that already feels so disconnected that we could use him. I feel like I remember hearing that, or you never know where his fate might be. But then in this film, you just connected him to a bunch of stuff. So I think that's like another, you know what I'm saying? Like he just told us he could use Shazam potentially.
Yeah.
And now it's like, can we? I don't know. I guess you can always delete post-credit scenes. You can always delete Wonder Woman. So maybe they can still use them in the future, but we'll have to see.
Well, I'll toss another wrinkle into this. Amanda Waller. They're not recasting Viola Davis. They are making clear and explicit connections to that character. And we know that one of the projects coming from James Gunn is a Waller TV show. And they just made a direct reference to her into this movie. So it's like, well, wait, what are we really? I don't know. It's just so many questions where it's like, again, us people who actively talk about this stuff frequently, we're thinking about this. I know most people are not thinking about this, but it does just create this weird relationship that we have to these movies. And so anytime I go back and rewatch Shazam Fury of the Gods and I see this post-credit scene, I'm just like, okay, I still don't even know where we're going with this. But the other one that we got was Dr. Savannah in the post-credit scene, once again played by Mark Strong. He once again encounters Mr. Mind, who we saw in the first post-credit scene of the first Shazam movie, and they playfully allude to the fact Mr. Mind is indeed a caterpillar and cannot move that fast, very, very slow-moving creature. So the plans that they're trying to enact, they're taking some time. So it was fun. It was a funny tidbit to call back to. David F. Sandberg did talk about that they were initially planning to include Mr. Mind in this movie. He was going to be the one responsible for somehow getting the goddesses into this world. I think that was the initial idea, but it just became too much story, too many characters, too much to try to juggle. So they just relegated it to like a reference here that like, yes, we remember we brought up this character in the post-credit scene for the first movie. Here's where things are with, both Savannah and Mr. Mind. What'd you think about, seeing this one unfold?
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty cool tidbit, man. I think Mr. Mind is such a funny character to introduce to people, man. It's an alien caterpillar. And it's like, dang, how do we get people to buy into this alien caterpillar? I think, does David F. Sandberg actually play Mr. Mind? I think he might voice Mr. Mind. I think that's so crazy. And that's so funny. But you don't see a lot of post-credit scenes that I think relate to each other directly, and I love that they did that. I thought that was really cool. He's like, I've been here 2 years, dude. What are you talking about? So yeah, I think that's a good way. Another funny tidbit to leave the movie on, and a movie that has X amount of comedy, a decent amount of comedy. It was like, okay, that was a funny post-credit scene. I could take that one and run with it.
Yeah, and for Mark Strong to play it so seriously was also equally as funny. He's like, what are you doing? I've been here for 2 years and we haven't done anything. Like, when are we planning to get on with this shit? So it was also like a really good performance. All I can do is slither. he slithers and he's like, wait, there's one more thing. Gotta take care of, but it's like, it's gonna be another 2 years before he comes back, bro. Don't hold your breath.
Another 2 years, man.
So yeah, it was funny to see. I mean, we don't know where it leads to, if anything, but it was funny to see. So final 2 questions for you. First, we'll talk about the DCEU and where does this rank? I mean, this is technically a part of the DCEU. We're 12 films in technically. It might be a little meaningless to do this now, a meaningless exercise, because the DCU will sort of rest in peace after this year. But I think for the sake of continuity, for the sake of how we have these conversations, where would this fall, sort of in the landscape of films that we've seen up until this point for you?
Currently right now I have it in the middle. It's like at a weird eighth spot behind I got BVS Dawn of Justice at my seventh spot and Birds of Prey at my ninth spot, if that makes sense. So it's kind of exists right here in the middle, man. Again, very, very fine movie. I don't hate it. I'll probably will watch it a couple more times, to be honest. It's pretty watchable. You know what I mean? It's not like a movie I'm like, I can't believe I'm watching this thing. So I think it's pretty watchable. I'll probably watch it a couple more times, but nowhere near the top, nowhere near the first Shazam, which I think it's the top 5 for me for sure, but also nowhere near the bottom. It's no Suicide Squad 2016. It's no Justice League 2017. It's no Wonder Woman 84. It's none of those movies, man. So yeah, it just exists in a weird middle spot. But yeah, I actually like the spot it's at. I think it's fine. I think it's fine.
It's also in my spot as well. So it's in between, similarly, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, but right below it, I have Black Adam. And so it is in my 8th spot. I like Man of Steel better. I like BVS better. Of course, Wonder Woman, Shazam, Suicide Squad, I like all better movies. But it's kind of, in that middle at this point. That's really, sort of speaking to the, I think just the overall reception and the quality of the film. It's sort of middle of the road at this point. Last question before we get out of here. What's your prediction on the character Shazam moving ahead, especially as it relates to Zach Levi and his role or lack thereof, I guess, in the future of the DCU? I know we've circled this conversation. It is hard to tell. We don't have really a substantial idea from leadership on what that'll look like. But if you had to just predict what you think they'll do with the character and with Zach Levi, what would that be?
Ooh, what a hard question. What I will say is James Gunn is a guy who feels like he is about to ramp up on all things DC. It does feel like he's about to, of course, take care of the loved ones, right? The big 3, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. It feels like he is going to do something at some point with those 3 characters. Definitely the first 2. Wonder Woman, we don't know what he's doing Wonder Woman at all. But we know he's going to take care of the first 2 in some form or fashion. I think somewhere down the line, Shazam does fit into that. If it's Zachary Levi, I don't know. But in terms of what he's doing now, man, it's just so hard to tell. Again, I will add that he did say Shazam was one of those characters that I already feel so disconnected that you might be able to bring him back and do something with it. To be honest, the biggest thing that deters me away from that is Asher Angel's age. A big part of Shazam is Billy Batson, man. When he's with JSA, very quick small comic story, him and Stargirl have like a whole romance. And people look at him weird because around the JSA he can only be Shazam, so people look at him weird because Stargirl's younger, not knowing that Billy Batson is also younger. That's like a whole thing. And so I because Asher Angel's getting older, I don't know if they can play with a lot of those different things with that character. So part of me feels like if he does bring him back, they'll have to recast Shazam. Maybe not Zachary Levi, but maybe they might have to cast Asher Angel. So that's how I feel about it right now, that they might bring back Zachary Levi as Shazam, but maybe not so much Asher Angel. That's where my headspace is currently, but we'll have to see.
So a couple things. One, literally before we started recording, I know David F. Sandberg tweeted out a bunch of things and talked about how he is leaving the superhero genre. He's not going to direct any more superhero movies, at least for the time being. He wants to get back to horror. Totally get it. He's done 2 of these back to back. Takes a lot out of you. So if they were to just hypothetically make a third Shazam movie, he would not be directing it if they go that route, which I don't think they will. I ultimately predict that Shazam will eventually come back into the DC universe in terms of live action. It will not be played by Zachary Levi or Asher Angel. Asher Angel is just going to be too old, and I think they're going to recast Zachary Levi. No particular reasons. I just think that they'll want to start fresh with that character, and just sort of go in a different direction. I think that that's what ultimately happens here. We'll have 2 Shazam movies, at least for the time being, to revisit if we choose to. We have like a duology here, which is nice. Most movies don't get sequels, so it's decent that they got a chance to do 2 of these, but I just don't see anything coming out of this, especially considering, we just got to be honest, the poor performance of this movie. It's just not doing that great from a critical reception standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint, it's not doing that great. So it's also like business wise, do we want to put more into what we know now as this character? Although quality wise, it might have been really beloved by a certain demographic. It's just not extrapolating that much value for us, at least for the short term. So they might just have to go back to the lab, revisit the character, figure out how they want to integrate them into the future. That does not necessarily preclude them, though, from doing something with the multiverse, which we know has become a thing and they could bring back Zach Levi if they so choose to. Might be a cop-out situation. I don't know. This multiverse stuff is getting very, very crazy and almost unwieldy, and I would probably detest that decision. But they do have an out, as you said. If they wanted to find a way, they could always find a way. It's comics.
Always.
So they'll figure it out. But folks, with that being said, that's all we have for our review of Shazam Fury of the Gods. If you've seen this movie, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.